Tonight, we're exploring the full story of Celebi, the time-traveling forest guardian of the Pokémon world. This is one of those topics with more beneath the surface, but I'll keep the tone calm so you can relax into the story. Thank you to those of you who've been joining us consistently. If you're falling asleep with us tonight, let me know in the comments how many nights in a row you've been here. And if this is your first night, just comment night 1. Now back to the video. Imagine, if you will, a forest so ancient that the very air feels heavy with the weight of centuries. The sunlight struggles to pierce through a canopy of emerald leaves, casting long, dancing shadows across a floor of moss and twisted roots. This is the Ilex forest, a sacred corner of the Johto region that feels removed from the bustling energy of Goldenrod City, just a few miles away. In the heart of this deep, quiet wood stands a small, weathered shrine made of simple timber. It is a humble structure, yet it serves as the focal point for one of the most enduring mysteries in the history of the Pokémon franchise. For over 2 decades, this shrine has been a place of pilgrimage for players and trainers alike, all searching for a glimpse of a creature that exists outside the normal flow of time. Celebi is a name that carries a sense of magic and nostalgia. It is the 251st entry in the National Pokédex, the final punctuation mark on the 2nd generation of Pokémon. To many who grew up with the series in the late 1990s and early 2000s, Celebi was the ultimate enigma. It wasn't a creature you could simply find in the tall grass or encounter at the end of a long cave. It was a myth, a ghost in the machine, a whisper of something more that lay hidden within the code of our game cartridges. It was the Mew of its era, but where Mew represented the genetic origin of all Pokémon, Celebi represented something more ethereal. It represented the spirit of nature itself and the terrifying, beautiful power of time travel. The stakes of Celebi's story are intertwined with the health of the planet. It is known as the Voice of the Forest, a title that is as literal as it is poetic. In the lore of the Johto region, Celebi is not merely a resident of the woods, it is their heartbeat. When a forest is healthy and the world is at peace, Celebi may appear, bringing with it a surge of life that can cause withered trees to bloom and dead landscapes to flourish in an instant. But this connection is a two-way street. Celebi's strength is tied to the vitality of the earth. When the trees are cut down, when the rivers are polluted, and when the silence of the grove is shattered by the sounds of industry, the Guardian weakens. Its story is a reflection of our own relationship with the natural world, a reminder that the things we protect are the very things that sustain us. But what truly sets Celebi apart is its relationship with time. It does not just observe the passing of years, it traverses them. Unlike the legendary Dialga, who governs the very fabric of the temporal dimension from a cosmic throne, Celebi moves through time like a bird moves through the air. It is a traveler. It can exist in the past, the present, and the future all at once, appearing in different eras to ensure that the balance of nature remains intact. This ability creates a fascinating paradox. How can a creature be a guardian of a specific place if it is constantly flickering in and out of different centuries? The answer lies in its eternal nature. To Celebi, time is not a straight line, but a vast, interconnected forest where every moment is a leaf on a tree. The mystery of Celebi is further deepened by the artifacts associated with it, most notably the GS Ball. This mysterious golden and silver container arrived in the Pokémon anime and games with no explanation, sparking years of theories and playground rumors. Why was it created? What was inside? And why did it lead so many back to that quiet shrine in the Ilex forest? For a long time, the answers were shrouded in development secrets and changing narratives, leaving a generation of fans to wonder about the true purpose of the ball that could not be opened. As we go deeper into this story, we have to look at the darker side of this mythology. What happens when the power of time travel falls into the wrong hands? We have seen the consequences of those who would try to capture the forest guardian in a dark ball, turning its gentle nature into a force of pure destruction. We have heard the legends of the Eternity Forest, a place where time was frozen by the hand of a creator to prevent a total ecological collapse. These stories remind us that while Celebi is a creature of peace, the forces it commands are beyond human comprehension. Tonight, we are going to peel back the layers of this green-winged mystery. We will explore the development history of the Johto region and how a simple background sprite became a legendary shrine. We will trace Celebi's journey through the movies, where it served as a bridge between the past and the present, and we will examine its role in the Mystery Dungeon series, where a shiny, pink-hued Celebi became a symbol of hope in a world where time had stopped. We will look at the fan theories that connect it to the highest gods of the Pokémon pantheon and the quiet moments of lore that suggest Celebi is more than just a Pokémon. It is a promise that the forest will always find a way to return. The world of Celebi is one of soft light, rustling leaves, and the gentle chime of psychic energy. It is a story about the cycles of life, the importance of preservation, and the idea that even the smallest creature can hold the power to change history. So let the sounds of the modern world fade away. Imagine the smell of damp pine and the feeling of a cool breeze on a summer evening. We are stepping into the shadows of the Ilex forest, waiting for the Guardian to appear. We are going back to the year 2000, and then even further back, to the very beginning of the forest's memory. This is the full story of Celebi, the traveler across time and the eternal protector of the green. In the quiet moments before we begin our deep dive into the specific events of the Johto legends, consider the nature of a guardian that only appears in times of peace. It suggests that Celebi is not just a protector, but a reward. It is a sign that the world is in balance. When Celebi, we know that the trees are safe and the timeline is secure. But in our journey tonight, we will also see what happens when that peace is threatened. We will see the Guardian in its most vulnerable states and its most powerful manifestations. From the pixelated tall grass of the original Game Boy Color games to the lush cinematic landscapes of the big screen, Celebi has remained a constant figure of wonder. It represents a specific kind of magic that the Pokémon series excels at, the magic of the unknown. Even now, with all the data we have and all the guides we can read, there is still a sense of mystery when we stand before that wooden shrine. It is a mystery that transcends code and enters the realm of true mythology. Let us begin by looking at the very first time the world heard the name Celebi. Let us look at the origins of its design, the intentions of its creators at Game Freak, and the way a simple forest dweller became the final, hidden treasure of the Johto Pokédex. We will explore the truth behind the GS Ball and the reasons why its story took so many unexpected turns. We will follow the ripples in time that Celebi leaves behind, and perhaps, by the end of our journey, we will understand why the voice of the forest continues to speak to us after all these years. The forest is waiting, the shrine is silent, the traveler is about to arrive. This is a journey through the green heart of the Pokémon world, a journey through the past, the present, and the future. This is the full story of Celebi. When the transition came, it was monumental. The Kanto region had defined a generation, 151 creatures, a complete Pokédex, a journey with a beginning, middle, and end. Red and Blue, the undeniable classics. They created a foundation that felt solid, finished, wrapped in the ribbon of an Elite Four victory and the ghostly whisper of a hidden 151st, Mew. Then the cartridge slid into the Game Boy Color, the screen loaded, and the world shifted. The journey started in a new place. Pallet Town was a memory. In its place, New Bark Town. The familiar was gone, replaced by a horizon that felt impossibly wide. The Kanto region felt like completed history. The Johto region felt like untold legend. The Pokédex itself had grown. It now spanned 2 regions, a collective of 251 entries, and it was the final entry, number 251, that cast the longest shadow. In Kanto, number 151 was the dream, the mythical, the creature that broke the known rules. Mew was the ancestor, the origin of all Pokémon DNA. It was elusive to the point of being a rumor, until the developers officially acknowledged its existence. In Johto, the final slot needed something that carried that same weight. But it could not just be a copy. It needed to fulfill a different legacy. It needed to be a successor to that specific brand of mystery. Number 251 was named Celebi, a name that felt ancient, whispered, soft. Its typing set it apart immediately. Psychic and Grass, a combination no one had seen. Psychic maintained that strange, unearthly power that Mew possessed. Grass grounded it to the living world in a way Mew never was. Where Mew swam through primordial DNA, Celebi drifted through time itself. The Pokédex entries were sparse, fragmentary. It was said to travel across time, a creature of pure grace that would only reveal itself in times of peace. It was a guardian, not of life's origin, but of life's persistence. The developer Hironobu Yoshida designed Celebi to be cute and fairy-like, much like its predecessor, but its integration into the games was different. It was not just hidden in the code of a truck, it was absent, completely. The spot was reserved, a placeholder for a creature that could not be caught through normal play. This created a vacuum, a void in the Johto Pokédex that demanded to be filled with theories. Players scoured Ilex Forest, a dense, ancient wood that acted as a crossroads between two halves of the Johto region. At the edge of this forest stood a small wooden shrine. It had no purpose in the game. It was just a texture, a set of sprites added to make the background feel lived in. But the placement was too perfect. The shrine was isolated, serene, surrounded by trees. It felt sacred. The community did what it always does when faced with a mystery. It built a story. Rumors spread that bringing the rainbow wing and the silver wing to that shrine would summon the creature. It was a rumor entirely created by the fanbase, something the developers themselves were confused by because it had no basis in reality. And yet it was so popular, so persistent, that years later, in HeartGold and SoulSilver, Game Freak officially added the event. The fan myth became canon. That willingness to adapt shows how deeply Celebi had already rooted itself into the mythology of the Pokémon world. Its power was unique. Celebi could coexist in two time periods at once. It could exist in the past, the present, and the future simultaneously. It saw the timeline as a single, interconnected forest. From a storytelling perspective, this made it a bridge in every sense of the word. A bridge between Kanto and Johto. A bridge between the player and the lore. The time travel ability gave Celebi a different kind of ethereality than Mew. Mew felt like a fossil come to life. Celebi felt like a spirit of the woods, watching from between the seconds. When it appeared, plant life flourished. Entire groves could be created or destroyed at its whim, but it was never aggressive. The requirement for its presence was peace. It was the guardian of the green places, the quiet heartbeat of the wilderness. The shadow of the 251st was one of gentle anticipation. It was not a shadow of fear, but of promise. The promise of a deeper story waiting to be uncovered. That story begins where the mystery of Celebi started for so many players. Not in a laboratory, not in a cave, but in the quiet of the woods. Before the time travel, before the movies, there was just the forest and a shrine. The full tale of number 251 starts not with a scientific mystery, but with a deeply natural one. A tale that finds its true beginning in the shade of the guardian of Ilex Forest. The shadow of the 251st was just the first step into the woods. The previous chapter ended on a quiet note, standing at the edge of the known world. The Kanto region had felt vast, complete, with its 151 captured in the pages of the first Pokédex. Then came Johto, a land that felt like stepping into a forgotten diary, filled with entries that hinted at a deeper, older history. The final entry in that new Pokédex, the 251st, was a shadow. No one had seen it. No one could catch it. It was a ghost story whispered in the halls of Game Freak, a blank space in the national roster. The shadow had a name, of course, Celebi. But to understand Celebi, you cannot start with the creature itself. You have to start with its home. You have to walk into the Ilex Forest. Let us look closely at the geography of the Ilex Forest, because the land itself tells the first part of the story. It sits in the heart of Johto, a dense knot of ancient trees connecting the quiet industry of Azalea Town to the rolling pastures of Route 35. It is a labyrinth of permanent twilight. The canopy is so thick that the sun rarely touches the forest floor, creating a cool, damp atmosphere where moss drapes over every branch and the air smells of wet earth and wild mint. The paths are narrow, twisting, easy to get lost in. The Pokémon here are purely of the forest, bug types, grass types, the occasional flying type that dares the undergrowth. For the people of Azalea Town, the forest is a boundary. It is the edge of their known world, but it is also a protector. Before modern construction, the forest acted as a natural wall against the elements, against invaders, against the passage of time itself. It is a natural sanctuary because it is naturally resistant to the world outside. The forest simply does not care about the clock. It grows at its own pace. This brings us to the heart of the bond between the forest and its guardian. The relationship between Celebi and Ilex Forest is not one of simple residence. It is symbiotic. It is biological and spiritual at the same time. The forest is the physical anchor for Celebi's existence in the present. When the forest is healthy, Celebi is strong. The roots of the trees act as a biological network, feeding psychic energy back into the guardian. And in return, when Celebi appears, plant life does not just grow, it surges. It can create, revitalize, and expand entire forests in the blink of an eye. You can feel this in the game's design, in the music that plays when you enter the forest. A soft, gentle melody, almost like a lullaby. This is the sound of a creature sustaining an ecosystem through sheer will. The green of the Ilex forest is not just the color of leaves. It is the color of a guardian breathing life into everything it touches. Conversely, when the forest is threatened, Celebi suffers. The movie demonstrates this bond with brutal clarity. When the Eternity Forest is cut down by industry, Celebi weakens physically. It becomes sick. It flees through time, wounded, bleeding energy. The forest dies in the present because the guardian is no longer there to sing it back to life. In the extended is so tied to the land that it once prayed to Arceus when its forest was being destroyed. And Arceus answered, freezing the remaining trees into stone, preserving the guardian in a state of eternal stasis. The forest became a tomb of living rock, a monument to the dangers of breaking the natural pact. This is not a creature that can exist without its home. They are the same thing. The people of Azalea Town understand this bond implicitly. The town itself is famous for two things, the Slowpoke Well and the Ilex Shrine. The Slowpoke Well provides a steady resource, a source of wealth and sustenance that the town has relied on for generations. But the Ilex Shrine sits at the edge of the forest, a quiet wooden structure built by hands that knew they were in the presence of something greater. It is a place of offering. The culture of Azalea Town is defined by this proximity to the sacred. They do not try to cut the forest back. They do not industrialize it. They preserve it. The shrine is a symbol of their pact with the forest. They give respect, and the forest gives protection. This is a very real, very ancient relationship. It mirrors the bond between any village and its local sacred grove throughout human history. The Ilex Forest is the heart of Azalea Town's identity, even if most residents never see the guardian itself. The shrine itself is a fascinating piece of lore because of how it evolved. It started as a background detail in a video game, a collection of sprites, a simple wooden roof over an altar. No event was originally programmed for it. The developers have admitted that it was just added to decorate the area, to give the forest a sense of depth and mystery. But the players saw it, and they saw the mystery of the 251st entry, and they connected the two in their minds. They believed deeply that if you performed the right ritual, brought the right items from distant legends, the guardian would appear at the shrine. Game Freak eventually listened. In the remakes, and the shrine became a fully realized event. It was the first time the bond between the people and the guardian was made mechanically real in the main series. You bring the GS Ball to the shrine, you wait, and the forest responds. The guardian appears, not with a roar, but with the flutter of crystalline wings. It is a moment of pure peace. This is the nature of the guardian. Celebi reveals itself only in times of peace. It is the core of its character. It is not a warrior. It does not throw the world into chaos. It waits. It watches, it heals. The time travel ability is not a weapon. It is a tool for escape, for rebirth, for correcting a wrong. It can coexist in two time periods, because it exists slightly outside of linear time, anchored only by the health of its forest. This makes it unique among the mythical Pokémon. It is fragile, but it is eternal. The Ilex forest is the vessel that holds it to this world. So we have the geography, a labyrinth of green. We have the symbiosis, a bond of life and energy. We have the culture, a town living in the shadow of a miracle. This is the body of the legend. But what of the soul? What defines a mythical Pokémon? What is the architecture of a myth? We have seen the Sanctuary and the Guardian. Now it is time to build the framework, to understand the rules that make a creature like Celebi more than just a monster in a forest, but a symbol of something truly timeless. The foundation is laid. The story of Celebi is built on the roots of the Ilex forest, and those roots run deeper than the world knows. We spent the last chapter deep within the embrace of Ilex forest, tracing the invisible threads that bind its health to the presence of its guardian. It is a place of profound, almost ancient quiet. A sanctuary where the canopy filters the sunlight into a perpetual twilight, and the only movement is the slow drift of spores and the rustle of unseen wings. But within this living, breathing ecosystem, there is a structure that feels distinctly out of place, yet utterly essential. A landmark that acts as a focal point for the forest's spiritual gravity. The wooden shrine. It stands at the edge of a clearing, a modest construction of timber and shadow. It does not dominate the landscape. It humbly resides within it, worn smooth by rain and time. To the untrained eye, it might be mistaken for a simple decorative piece, a background detail added to break up the monotony of the pixelated green. But look closer. Its architecture tells a story. The raised platform, the curved roof, the weathered pillars, they echo the ancient Shinto traditions of giving a physical home to a wandering spirit. An object capable of attracting a kami. The shrine is not just a monument Celebi, it is a vessel Celebi. This is the heart of the myth we have come to accept. But here is where the story takes a turn that every student of video game mythology should marvel at. This intricate piece of lore architecture, this carefully designed focal point for the most mysterious Pokémon in the Johto region, was an accident. According to Hironobu Yoshida, the designer at Game Freak, the shrine in Ilex Forest was born from improvisation. Spare sprite parts, a rooftop piece here, a stairway texture there. They were arranged to add visual depth to the background, to simply make the forest floor look more interesting. It was background filler. It had no narrative purpose. It was a stage prop without a play, and from that silence, a thunderous fan theory was born. The lack of an official explanation created a vacuum, and nature, as they say, abhors a vacuum. Players began to project their own mysteries onto this empty vessel. Rumors spread like wildfire across the early internet, through playgrounds and fan magazines. If you brought the Rainbow Wing and the Silver Wing, the items associated with Ho-Oh and Lugia, to this shrine, Celebi would appear. It made a strange, poetic sense. The guardian of the sky, the guardian of the sea, and the guardian of the forest, their powers converging at this single point. Game Freak staff were reportedly baffled. They had no idea where this rumor came from. The shrine was just supposed to be a pretty background detail. But the myth had already taken root, deeper than any pixelated tree in the game's code. It was one of the greatest fan-driven mysteries in gaming, entirely built on a foundation of nothing. This is the ultimate illusion of world building. The developer creates a space. The player fills it with meaning. The shrine became the symbol of the unknown, the dangling thread of the Johto Pokédex, number 251, tied to a wooden post in a quiet forest. Eventually, Game Freak leaned into the myth. The shrine was activated. The long-standing fan rumor was validated and woven into the fabric of official canon. The creature of background filler became the centerpiece of a fully realized event. The architecture of the myth had finally found its architect. The shrine holds the spirit. The wood and stone form the anchor that allows belief to crystallize into presence. But to truly understand the nature of the guardian itself, we have to look beyond the physical vessel and into the very substance of its being. Its typing holds a fascinating contradiction, a duality that speaks to the core of its powers. It is a creature of the mind and a creature of the soil, a being of pure psychic will, rooted in the living earth. This is the tension that defines it. This is the Psychic-Grass Duality, the wooden shrine in Ilex Forest, built from simple sprite parts by a designer who never imagined it would become a legend, stands as a silent monument to something much deeper, Yet the shrine itself is only the physical anchor for a creature whose very existence is woven from two opposing elemental forces. Celebi is classified as a psychic and grass type, a combination that seems paradoxical at first glance. How can a being that bends the fabric of time also be rooted to the soil, dependent on the slow crawl of seasons and the whisper of leaves? That duality is not a contradiction, it is the key to understanding what Celebi truly is. When you look at the psychic type, you think of mental power, of telekinesis, of bending reality with thought alone. Celebi's psychic abilities are indeed the engine that allow it to slip between centuries, to exist in two moments at once, to send itself and others hurtling forward or backward across the timeline. But this is not the cold, sterile time control of Dialga, who governs the flow of time as a cosmic overseer. Celebi's psychic gift is more like intuition made manifest. It senses the threads of time, not as a mechanical system, but as a living tapestry. It does not command time with brute force. It navigates time like a forest path, guided by the gentle pull of what needs to be healed or preserved. The psychic element gives Celebi the awareness to see across eras, but it is the grass typing that gives that awareness a purpose. Grass is the type of growth, of renewal, of the slow and patient cycle of life. It is earthbound, humble, yet persistent. For a time traveler, being grass type means that no matter how far you journey into the past or future, you remain connected to a single living place. The forest is your home. The forest is your body. Every tree that rises, every flower that blooms, every root that burrows deep into the soil is an extension of Celebi's own being. Its psychic powers allow it to move through time, but its grass nature ensures it never loses its anchor in the present. It is the perfect balance. The mind can roam across centuries, but the heart stays fixed in the earth. This is why Celebi can only appear in times of peace. When the forest is wounded, its grass essence weakens, and its ability to traverse time falters. The two types are not separate. They are interdependent, like the roots and the branches of a single tree. The visual design of Celebi reflects this partnership beautifully. Hironobu Yoshida, the designer, was told to create something cute and fairy-like, akin to Mew, but with a distinct identity. The result is a creature that looks like it could have been born from a dewdrop on a fern. Its body is small and round, with large luminous eyes that carry both wisdom and innocence. Its head is shaped like an onion bulb, a subtle nod to its grass origin. The wings are not feathered like a bird's, nor leathery like a bat's. They are translucent, veined like the leaves of a young sapling, catching the light and casting soft greenish glows. The eyes are a deep blue, hinting at the psychic depths beneath. And yet, the overall impression is not of a fearsome psychic entity, but of a gentle forest spirit, one that could flit between blades of grass as easily as between decades. This fairy-like aesthetic is intentional. The word fairy itself carries connotations of the ephemeral, the magical, the boundary between worlds. Celebi is a fairy of the forest, but also a fairy of time. Its design bridges the ancient folklore of woodland sprites with the modern Pokémon mythology of time travel. The grass typing gives it a tactile, organic quality. You can almost feel the smoothness of its skin, the soft rustle of its wings, the faint scent of damp earth and fresh leaves that must surround it. The psychic typing adds an ethereal glow, a sense that there is always more to this creature than what the eye can see. Together they make Celebi feel both real and otherworldly, both of this moment and of every moment. This duality is not just aesthetic or thematic, it is functional. In battle, a grass and psychic type is weak to fire, ice, poison, flying, ghost, bug and dark. That is a long list of vulnerabilities, but it also resists fighting, water, electric, grass, psychic and ground. Celebi is not a warrior, it is a guardian, a healer. Its typing allows it to withstand the slow erosion of time itself, while remaining fragile enough to be vulnerable to the rapid, destructive forces of industry and greed. The industrialists who cut down the Eternity Forest in the anime did not need to fight Celebi directly. They only needed to attack its habitat, and the grass typing would do the rest. But the psychic typing means that even when its body is broken, its mind can still reach across time, can still call for help from Arceus, and still find a way to restore what was lost. This interdependence of mind and matters, of time and soil, is what makes Celebi so compelling. It is not a god of time who sits above the world. It is a creature of the earth who can visit the past and future, but always returns to the same forest clearing, the same shrine, the same patch of moss. Its power is not about domination. It is about connection, and that connection is fragile. It requires the forest to be healthy, the shrine to be respected, the humans to be peaceful. When those conditions are met, Celebi can move through time, like a stream flowing through a meadow. But when they are broken, the stream dries up, and the time traveler becomes trapped in a single wounded moment. This raises a profound question. If Celebi can travel through time, why does it not simply go back and prevent the destruction from happening in the first place? Why does it allow the forest to be cut down, the shrine to be forgotten, the Iron-Masked Marauder to capture it with a dark ball? The answer lies in the nature of time travel itself, and in the paradoxes that inevitably arise when you try to rewrite history. Celebi is not a master of time in the way Dialga is. It can journey through time, but it cannot control the consequences. It is bound by the same rules that govern all time travelers in fiction. Changing the past can create new timelines, erase existing ones, or lead to unforeseen disasters. And Celebi, being a creature of life and peace, is reluctant to risk such chaos. It would rather heal the present than rewrite the past. This tension between the desire to heal and the fear of paradox is what we will explore next, as we turn to the deeper mechanics of Celebi's time travel ability and the strange loops that its power creates. The Psychic-Grass Duality is the foundation, but the true mystery lies in how Celebi navigates the impossible labyrinth of cause and effect. That story is waiting for us in the next chapter, where time itself becomes both the problem and the solution. Celebi's dual nature as a psychic and grass type is not merely a classification, it is the very blueprint of its existence. The psychic energy coursing through it grants the power to touch the fabric of reality, to bend and perceive time in ways most beings cannot fathom. Yet, it is the grass typing that roots this power in the living world, tethering vast temporal forces to the gentle cycle of growth and decay. Without that anchor, Celebi might have become a being of pure chaos or detached cosmic authority. Instead, it remains intimately connected to the forests it guards, and this connection shapes the very nature of its time travel. This brings us to the core paradox that defines Celebi. Unlike Dialga, the Pokémon of time itself, who controls the river of time with an iron will, Celebi is not a master of time. It is a traveller. It does not command the currents. It swims within them. This distinction is crucial. Where Dialga holds dominion over temporal sovereignty on a universal scale, Celebi operates on a more localized, intimate level. Its time travel is not about governing past, present, and future, but about moving through them, like a forest spirit stepping between the branches of different seasons. Imagine for a moment what it means to travel through time, rather than control it. For Celebi, time is not a straight line but a vast interconnected web. It can appear in ancient forests centuries before humanity, and then flutter into a future where those forests have grown into something new. But here is where the paradox deepens. Celebi does not just move between eras. It can coexist in multiple eras at once. There can be multiple Celebi from different points in history inhabiting the same moment, each one a version of itself from a different time. This is not a temporal anomaly, but a natural state for Celebi, because its time travel is not bound by linear progression. It can be present in the past, the present, and the future simultaneously, each iteration of Celebi aware of the others yet independent in its actions. This concept of coexistence sets Celebi apart from almost every other time-based entity in the Pokémon universe. When Dialga moves, it is a singular presence, altering the flow of time for everything. But Celebi can split its own existence across time, allowing multiple versions of itself to interact and cooperate. This is seen in the lore, where a Celebi from one era might help a Celebi from another, working together to heal a forest or protect a sacred site. It is as if Celebi exists outside the constraints of chronology, a being that can be both everywhere and everywhen, yet always rooted in the present moment of its chosen location. Now contrasting this with Dialga reveals the true scope of Celebi's abilities. Dialga is the embodiment of time itself, a force that controls the very passage of moments from the beginning to the end of existence. Its temporal sovereignty is absolute and universal. When Dialga is injured or disturbed, the entire timeline can fracture. Celebi's time travel, on the other hand, is like a needle threading through the fabric of time, making careful stitches rather than tearing the whole cloth. Celebi can leap from one era to another without disrupting the larger timeline, because its abilities are localized, often tied to specific places like Ilex Forest or the Eternity Forest. It is a guardian of moments, not a dictator of ages. This distinction is why Celebi is often referred to as a mythical Pokémon rather than a legendary one. Its power is profound but not invasive. It does not seek to control the flow of history. It seeks to protect the life that history supports. When Celebi travels through time, it is guided by its connection to nature and the need to preserve balance. It heals the wounds of the past and nurtures the seeds of the future, all while remaining a gentle presence within the forest. As you drift deeper into the quiet of this story, consider the implications of a being that can be in multiple times at once. Think of the Celebi that watches over the ancient shrine in Ilex Forest, and another version of itself that might be soaring through the skies of a distant future. Yet both are equally real and present. This coexistence is not a source of conflict but of harmony, each Celebi working in concert to maintain the flow of life. But even with all this temporal freedom, there is one mystery that has eluded even Celebi's understanding for generations. An object known as the GS Ball has been rumoured to hold the key to summoning Celebi, a relic that connects the shrine to the time traveller itself. This enigma has persisted through the ages, a puzzle wrapped in the very fabric of time, and it is a story we must unravel next, as the shadow of the GS Ball looms ever larger over the history of this guardian. For now, let the image of Celebi fluttering through the ages settle in your mind, a timeless guardian forever at peace. The concept of coexistence is a fascinating puzzle. The idea that a single creature can exist in multiple time periods at once raises a difficult question for anyone trying to interact with it. How do you hold on to something that isn't entirely anchored your present moment? The answer for the world of Pokémon came in the form of an object that became one of the most infamous loose ends in the franchise's history, an object known as the GS Ball. The Gold and Silver Ball, or GS Ball for short, first appeared in the early Johto era of the anime. It was a smooth sphere, roughly the size of an apricorn, painted in a swirling pattern of deep gold and silver. It was given to Professor Elm by a mysterious Pokeball craftsman named Kurt, who lived in Azalea Town. Kurt had been working on the sphere for years, but could not open it. The ball possessed no seams, no latch, no visible mechanism. It was sealed. Professor Elm, unable to crack the mystery, eventually passed it to Ash Ketchum, tasking him with delivering it to the shrine in Ilex Forest. As we discussed in an earlier chapter, that shrine existed as a background detail with no deep programmed event behind it, but the anime intended to give it purpose. The GS Ball was the key, it was the vessel, and it was meant to hold Celebi. Looking back at the narrative structure of the time, it becomes clear what the showrunners were building towards. The third Pokémon movie was in production during this period. The villain of that film, the Iron-Masked Marauder, used a dark ball to capture and corrupt Celebi. The GS Ball was the anime's attempt to connect the television series to that cinematic plot, or perhaps create a grand game anime crossover event. The ball acted as a beacon. Its energy signature matched the temporal frequency of Celebi, meaning it was the only device capable of summoning the Pokémon from the time stream. The theory was that opening the GS Ball at the Ilex Shrine would release Celebi, bridging the gap between the game world and the narrative world of the show, but that moment never came. The episode where Ash was supposed to open the ball at the shrine was never produced. Instead, the storyline simply vanished. Ash handed the ball back to Professor Elm, who placed it on a shelf in his lab, and there it stayed, gathering dust for the rest of the series. Why? The answer lies in the complicated relationship between the games and the anime, and the geographical limits of the Pokémon franchise at the time. The developers at Game Freak had coded a specific event into Pokémon Crystal where the GS Ball could be used to catch Celebi. However, this event relied on the mobile adapter system, a peripheral that only worked in Japan. The anime, which usually ran several months ahead of the games internationally, had to be carefully calibrated. The writers knew that the payoff of the GS Ball, the capture or freeing of Celebi, would only be playable by a fraction of the audience in one specific country. The decision was made to pull the plug. The writers abandoned the plotline, rather than dangle an unresolved mystery that the majority of their viewers could never solve themselves. The GS Ball became a dead end, a relic of a story that was deemed too complicated to finish. But the story didn't quite end there. In Japan, the resolution was fully realized. Owners of Pokémon Crystal and the mobile adapter could download the GS Ball directly into their game. Taking this digital ball to the Ilex Forest Shrine triggered a unique encounter. The player would place the ball on the shrine. A flash of light would erupt, the forest would shimmer, and Celebi would appear, emerging from the very flow of time itself. The ball, having fulfilled its purpose, vanished. The mystery was over for Japanese players. For the rest of the world, this remained a legendary piece of cut content for nearly 2 decades. It wasn't until the Virtual Console re-release of Pokémon Crystal on the Nintendo 3DS, and later the inclusion of Celebi in broader events, that the full GS Ball event became accessible to a global audience in a meaningful way. And even then, the anime episode never got its proper ending. The GS Ball remains a scar on the timeline, a physical reminder of a story that resolved itself for one audience while leaving another with an eternal question mark. While the television series fumbled its climax, the movie stepped in to fill the void. It offered a different kind of resolution, one not tied to a piece of hardware or a regional promotion. It gave the story of Celebi a voice. That is where we turn next, because the true heart of this myth was never about the ball, it was about the forest. And in that forest, there was a voice calling out across time, a voice that would finally be heard in the voice of the forest. The GS Ball remains one of Pokémon's most intriguing loose ends, a plot thread meticulously threaded with the Johto saga, only to be snipped clean and tucked away in a drawer. It was a mystery without a final piece, or so it seemed to Western audiences. In Japan, the story of Celebi did not end with the abandoned GS Ball. It exploded into full view with a cinematic release that would fundamentally reshape our understanding of the Forest Guardian. That movie was Celebi, the voice of the forest. By the time the 4th Pokémon movie hit theaters the summer of 2001, the rumours and background details of Ilex Forest had coalesced into a concrete, heartbreaking, and ultimately hopeful narrative. This film is the single most important piece of media for understanding Celebi beyond the sparse entries of the Pokédex. It is the story that gave the time-travel Pokémon a voice, literally and metaphorically. The movie introduces us to a location that expands the geography of Celebi's power far beyond the simple shrine in Johto. We are taken to the Eternity Forest, a name that perfectly captures the creature's domain. This is not just a patch of trees, it is a living archive, a place where time itself breathes differently. The Eternity Forest is ancient, thick with growth, and humming with an energy that feels untouched by the outside world. It is here that Celebi dwells in its most natural state, a playful sprite flitting between the branches of trees that have stood for centuries. The movie uses this setting to firmly establish Celebi as a bridge between the ancient past and the industrializing present. This is the core tension of the entire film. The movie does something brilliant. It gives Celebi a trauma, a deep, ancient wound that still bleeds into the present day, a flashback to a time before the film's main events. The Eternity Forest was under threat. The iron tracks of industry were creeping toward it. Trees were felled. The land was flattened. The balance was broken. As the forest died, Celebi weakened. It was a creature so intrinsically tied to the health of its environment that the loss of a single tree was a loss of a piece of itself. In its desperation, Celebi prayed, not to another Pokémon for battle, but for salvation. It prayed to a higher power, to Arceus, and Arceus answered. But the answer was not simply a beam of light that repelled the invaders. Arceus blasted a beam of raw energy into the forest. It did not destroy the town. It did not smite the loggers. Instead, it froze them. The trees turned to stone. The town and its people disappeared, erased not from existence, but from time. The forest was petrified in a state of eternal stasis. It became a monument to a moment of crisis, a frozen scream silenced by divine intervention. This is the lore that the film adds. Celebi is not just a guardian, it is a survivor. It is watched over by forces far greater than itself, and its very existence can be weaponized by the cosmos to preserve peace, even at the cost of progress. This backstory gives tremendous weight to what happens in the film's present. The villain, the man who seeks to capture Celebi, is not just a poacher, he is an industrialist, a representative of the very forces that nearly destroyed the forest long ago. He captures Celebi in a dark ball, a device that corrupts Pokémon and twists their nature. Once captured, Celebi is no longer a playful healer. It becomes a destructive giant, lashing out with raw power that tears the earth apart. This transformation is a direct commentary on what happens when nature is forced into a cage, when the bridge between eras is severed and forced to serve the greed of the present. And this brings us to the most critical expansion of Celebi's lore in this film, the introduction of the Lake of Life. The Lake of Life is a natural spring hidden deep within the Eternity Forest. In the movie, it is presented as the ultimate source of rejuvenation and purification. Its waters glow with a soft, ethereal light. When Celebi is corrupted, it is the water from the Lake of Life that restores it. The lake represents the pure, untainted spirit of the forest itself, a concentrated form of the life force that Celebi protects. The purification scene is the emotional heart of the film. The corrupted Celebi is a tragedy. It screams in pain. It destroys without understanding. But when a handful of the lake's water is brought to it, the corruption instantly begins to melt away. The dark energy dissipates. Celebi reverts to its small, gentle form. The Lake of Life is not just a healing spring. It is a narrative mechanism that reinforces the movie's central theme. That nature, when allowed to be itself, is the only true cure for the corruption brought by industry and malice. It is a pure source, untouched by the industrializing world, that holds the power to restore the bridge between the past and the present. Analyzing this film, exactly how Celebi's lore was solidified for a generation of fans. Before this movie, Celebi was a rumor, a sprite behind a shrine. After this movie, Celebi became a character, a being with history, with pain, with a desperate love for its home. The movie took the vague concept of a forest guardian and gave it a mythology. It showed us that Celebi's time travel isn't just a convenience for events, it is a burden. Celebi has seen the future of its forest. It has likely seen its own end, yet it continues to exist in the moment, protecting what it can, healing what it can. Celebi's role as a bridge between the ancient past and the industrializing present is perfectly embodied in the final act of the film. After being purified, Celebi uses its power not to destroy the machinery of the villains, but to restore the forest. It flies through the dead, petrified trees, and life blossoms in its wake. The stone turns to wood, the leaves return, the forest breathes again. It is a direct contrast to the bulldozers and cranes that represent the present. The ancient force of renewal overcomes the modern force of consumption. As we settle deeper into this story, we must recognize the darkness that this film introduced to oppose that light. The creature that became a giant of destruction was twisted by a tool of immense power, a dark ball created by a man who understood darkness intimately. The movie gives us a villain who represents the absolute worst of humanity's relationship with nature, a manipulator who saw a mythical creature and thought only of its power. Up next, we will look directly into the eyes of that villain, the man behind the mask, the orchestrator of the corruption. We will explore Chapter 8, the Iron-Masked Marauder, a man who stands as the antithesis of everything Celebi represents, a figure whose cold ambition nearly silenced the voice of the forest forever. The 2001 film gave us the Lake of Life, a sanctuary of pure rejuvenation, where Celebi could be cleansed of corruption. But before that healing light, there was a shadow, and that shadow had a name, the Iron-Masked Marauder. He was not a Pokémon, not a force of nature, but a human, a poacher, a thief of the sacred, armed with technology that should never have been allowed to touch a being like Celebi. His weapon was the Dark Ball, a device designed to trap and corrupt mythical Pokémon, turning their very essence into something twisted, something that served only destruction. The Dark Ball was not a simple Pokeball with a different paint job. It was a prison of pure malevolence, engineered to break the will of creatures tied to the fabric of time and life. When the Iron-Masked Marauder hurled it at Celebi, the ball did not just capture, it invaded. It seeped into Celebi's psychic core, its grass-typing roots, its connection to the forest, and it began to rewrite the Guardian's nature. The gentle time traveler, the healer of plants, the voice of the forest, all of that was silenced, replaced by a single overwhelming command: destroy. The transformation was not gradual, it was violent, a sudden eclipse of light. Celebi's fairy-like wings darkened, its eyes turned red, and its aura shifted from verdant green to a sick, deep purple. The forest around it recoiled, trees that had stood for centuries bent away, as if they could feel the corruption spreading through the air. The Iron-Masked Marauder had succeeded in creating a weapon, a dark Celebi, a force of nature turned against itself. This was not a corrupted Pokémon in the traditional sense. It was a corruption of an entire ecosystem, a perversion of the symbiotic bond that held Ilex Forest alive. What does Dark Celebi reveal about the fragility of the faucet's balance? It tells us that Celebi is not invincible. Its power, the ability to create forests with a thought, to cross time itself, is not absolute. There is a vulnerability in that bond, a thread that can be snapped if the Guardian is severed from its purpose. When Celebi was corrupted, the forest did not just lose its protector, it lost its anchor. The trees began to wither, the stream slowed, the Pokémon fled. The balance was not just disturbed, it was inverted. The very life force that Celebi channeled was now being used to fuel chaos. The Iron-Masked Marauder had turned the forest's heart into a weapon against itself. The corruption spread like a disease. Dark Celebi did not need to attack directly. Its presence alone was enough to drain the life from the land. The grass beneath its shadow turned grey, the flowers closed, and the air grew cold. This was the cost of tampering with a mythical Pokémon, not just a monster rampaging, but an entire world unravelling. The Dark Ball had shown that even the most peaceful Guardian could become a destroyer, and that the forest's balance was only as strong as the purity of its voice. It was the Lake of Life that would eventually restore Celebi, but not before the Marauder had proven his point. He had shown that the forest's fragility was not a flaw, but a feature that could be exploited. The dark Celebi form was a mirror, reflecting the consequences of breaking that sacred trust between Guardian and Grove, and it was that same fragility that would lead to the next chapter. The concept of an eternity forest, a forest frozen in time to protect its Guardian, would reveal just how far Arceus was willing to go to preserve that balance. But what drove that corruption? What broke Celebi's spirit so deeply that a dark ball could even take hold was not something that happened in a single moment of malice. It was a wound that had been festering for centuries. Grief older than the forests of Johto, older than the shrine at Ilex, older perhaps than any memory the world still carries. And that wound has a name, though few who speak it understand what it truly means. The Eternity Forest, a place that existed before Ilex, before the Johto we know, before human civilization ever laid its heavy hand upon the land. A place that was once Celebi's first home. The lore of the Eternity Forest is exclusive to the anime, to the film that introduced us to Celebi's voice. But it reaches back further than the movie's plot. It reaches into a time when Celebi was not merely a guardian of a single wooded sanctuary, but the soul of an entire living ecosystem, a vast, unbroken expanse of ancient trees that stretched from the mountains to the sea, a land where every leaf breathed in rhythm with the mythical Pokémon's heartbeat. This was not a forest in the ordinary sense. It was a living altar, a temple of roots and canopy, where time itself moved differently. Celebi could be seen at dawn and dusk in the same moment, flitting between centuries as easily as a bird moves between branches. And the people who lived in the villages at the forest's edge knew this. They honoured the forest, built shrines at its borders, left offerings of berries and woven grass. They understood that the forest was not just a place. It was a present, but understanding does not survive generations. As the villages grew into towns, and towns into cities, the reverence faded. The forest was vast, they told themselves. What harm could a few trees make? And so the axes began to fall, not with malice, not with hatred, but with the slow grinding indifference of progress. Industrialization crept in like a fog. The first clearings were small, almost apologetic, but they invited others. Roads were carved through the undergrowth. Mills rose along the rivers that had once sung with Celebi's passing. Smoke replaced the scent of damp earth. The village that had once honoured the forest became a town that needed lumber, needed fuel, needed land, and the forest shrank. Celebi watched. It could not stop the axes, for they were wielded by beings with free will, and Celebi's power was never meant to dominate. It could flee through time, could hide in centuries not yet born, but the forest was its anchor. Each tree felled was a thread pulled from its own being. Each clearing was a wound that refused to heal, and as the forest diminished, so did Celebi's strength. The time traveller began to stumble. Its journeys grew shorter, more desperate. It would leap forward 100 years, only to find the forest thinner, the air heavier. It would leap backward, hoping to find the old growth. But the past too was being hollowed out. The forest was dying not in a single cataclysm, but in a slow, grinding consumption that spanned decades. And Celebi was dying with it. The end came quietly. The last trees of the Eternity Forest stood in a ragged cluster, their roots tangled in soil that had grown barren. The nearby town, once a village of worshippers, was now a grim settlement of smokestacks and iron. The people had forgotten the old stories. They did not see the small, fading light that flickered among the remaining leaves. They did not hear the whisper that was once a song. Celebi, weakened beyond measure, could no longer flee. It could only watch as the last of its home was marked for harvest. It was then, in that final moment of desperation, that the mythical Pokémon did something it had never done before. It prayed, not to the forest, not to the cycles of time, but to the one being that stood above all others in the Pokémon world. Arceus, the Alpha Pokémon, the creator, the being from whose will all life had begun. Celebi did not ask for vengeance. It did not ask for power. It asked only for a miracle, a way to preserve what remained, to keep the memory of the Eternity Forest alive, even if its living breath could not be saved. And Arceus answered. From the heavens, a beam of light descended, not destructive, not violent, but absolute. It struck the remaining trees, and where it touched, the wood did not burn or break. It turned to stone. The living bark became grey and solid, the leaves frozen in mid-flutter, the roots locked into the earth as if carved from mountain rock. The forest did not die, it simply stopped. It became a monument to what had been lost, a petrified memory that would never decay, never be harvested, never be forgotten. And the The town that had grown from a village of reverence into a factory of forgetfulness. The light touched it too. In the space of a breath, the buildings, the people, the smoke, the iron, all of it vanished. Not destroyed, removed, as if they had never existed at all. A divine erasure, a final mercy that allowed the forest to exist in eternal stasis, untouched by the hands that had once wounded it. That place still exists, deep within the Petalburg woods, or perhaps beyond any map the modern world can draw. There is a grove of stone trees. They do not move, they do not grow, they do not even rot. They are the fossilized remnants of a prayer that was heard, a frozen moment of divine intervention that saved the essence of a mythical Pokémon's soul. And in that stasis, Celebi found a strange peace. It could not restore the forest, but it could protect the memory. It could carry that grief with it, a silent weight that would inform every future act of guardianship. This is the mythos that the Iron-Masked Marauder never understood. He saw a Pokémon he could corrupt, a creature of time he could weaponize. He did not see the centuries of loss that had already scarred Celebi's spirit. He did not know that when the Dark Ball consumed Celebi, it was feeding on a sorrow that had been waiting for release. And he certainly did not know that somewhere in the world, hidden from all but the most ancient memories, a forest of stone still held the answer to Celebi's deepest wound. That stasis, that silent petrified grove, is a subject unto itself, a chapter of lore that waits beneath the surface, where the stone trees do not whisper, where time itself has been turned to rock, and where the only sound is the faint echo of a prayer still being answered. That is the story of the Stasis of Stone. Celebi prayed, not for victory, not for revenge, but for a reprieve. It watched its home, the Eternity Forest, crumble under the weight of human industry. Trees that had stood for centuries were felled in hours. Rivers that once sang with the voices of 1,000 Pokémon ran silent and black. The heart of the forest, that ancient beating pulse of life, had begun to slow, and as the forest faded, so did its guardian. Celebi grew weak, translucent, its body flickering between moments of time as the present moment became too painful to inhabit. It was a death watch, and the creature who had sailed through the ages was about to be stranded at the very end of its timeline. But the universe does not surrender its myths so easily. From the depths of its fading consciousness, Celebi did something it had never done before. It called out, not to the Pokémon of the forest, not to the humans who had forgotten their pact, but upward. It called out to the one being who had no beginning and no end, the entity that sat at the very genesis of all things. It called out to Arceus, and Arceus answered. The heavens split open, not with thunder or fury, but with a light so pure it seemed to erase the very concept of shadow. This was not a blast of destruction, it was a command, a divine decree written in a language older than matter itself. Where that light touched the dying forest, life did not wither, it did not fight, it simply stopped. This is how Arceus preserved the dying forest. It turned its remaining life into stone. But understand what this truly means. This was not a petrification that kills. This was a preservation that holds. Every leaf caught in the perfect moment of its reaching toward the sun. Every blade of grass, frozen in the instant, it released a single breath of oxygen. Droplets of morning dew suspended in mid-air like frozen stars. The forest did not decay. It did not rot. It did not fade into dust. It became a monument. A perfect silent tombstone for a world that was about to end. And this brings us to a question that the Pokémon world seldom asks directly. What is the value of a life that cannot live? Think about the philosophical implications of a forest, frozen in time to prevent its total extinction. Arceus saved Celebi. It saved the trees, the flowers, the very soil. It preserved the memory of the forest with a precision that no human archive could ever replicate. But a forest is not a collection of objects. A forest is a process. It is the slow, patient dance of decay and regrowth. It is the fungus breaking down the fallen log so that new seedlings can rise from its corpse. It is the predator and the prey. It is the wind that bends the branches and the rain that soaks the roots. A forest frozen in time is no longer a forest. It is a photograph. It is a beautiful, heartbreaking museum of a single moment that will never have a tomorrow. And what of the reason this happened? The humans who destroyed the forest, the civilization that built its prosperity on the corpses of ancient trees. Did they face the wrath of a god? No, they faced something far more absolute. The disappearance of the surrounding civilization became an immediate consequence of Celebi's protection. When Arceus struck the forest with that beam of eternal stasis, it did not simply stop time within the grove. It reached outside the frame, the town that neighboured the Eternity Forest, the factories, the homes, the people who had been marching toward progress at the expense of life. They were simply gone, not destroyed, removed, erased from the flow of time as if they had never existed. Arceus did not judge them. It did not punish them. It treated them as a sculptor treats a flaw in the marble. It chiseled them away. The surrounding land became a vacuum, a silent, empty void surrounding the stone forest like a halo of nothingness. No rubble, no ghosts, no echoes of industry, just an unnerving, absolute silence where a bustling civilization once stood. A stark reminder that when the divine intervenes to protect something sacred, the profane is not always given a second thought. The civilization was wiped clean, leaving only the stone forest as a silent witness to what was lost. Now stand at the edge of that forest in your mind. The air is unnaturally still. There is no birdsong. There is no rustle of leaves. There is no scent of damp earth or blooming flowers. It is a silence so profound it rings in your ears. The trees rise before you like the pillars of a forgotten temple. You can see every detail of the bark, the exact curvature of a leaf caught mid-fall, a seed that will never reach the ground. It is the most beautiful and the most terrifying thing you could ever witness. It is nature immortalized, stripped of its chaos, its entropy, its very life. This is what Arceus gifted to Celebi, a sanctuary that exists outside of time, a home that is also a prison, a victory that tastes overwhelmingly like defeat. Because what is a guardian without a forest to nurture? What is a voice without an echo? Celebi was given eternity, but eternity in stone is just a very long, very patient silence. Does the Celebi that drifts through these frozen trees remember the sound of wind? Does it dream of spring? Or has it become part of the stone itself? A ghost haunting a museum of its own fading memory. The forest of stone waits. Celebi waits. The land around it is empty, a blank canvas upon which nothing has been painted. But life has a stubborn memory. The river remembers its course. The wind remembers the shape of the canopy. The rain remembers the taste of leaves. And deep within the heart of that stone, hidden from the eyes of gods and men, a single impossible pulse remains, a cycle trapped in amber, waiting for the moment the seal finally cracks. How that frozen moment thaws, what triggers the first fracture in the stone, and how a guardian learns to live in the world it saved. That is the story of the resurrection cycle. The Stasis of Stone was an act of mercy, or perhaps an act of profound grief. Arceus froze the Eternity Forest in a single perfect moment, preventing its decay, but also preventing its life. A frozen forest is a contradiction in terms. A forest must cycle through the seasons. It must grow, wither, fall, and rise again. To truly live, it must know death. And for a being like Celebi, whose very essence is woven into the fabric of time, death is a condition it has learned to transcend. This transcendence in its most potent form during the film's climax. Celebi, corrupted by the Dark Ball, is ripped away from its peaceful nature. It rages against the poison until the sheer strain breaks its body. The light fades from its eyes. The spirit departs from the small, fragile form. The forest itself seems to hold its breath in mourning. The characters reach out, but the presence is gone, or so it seems. But the cycle does not end. The tears of the forest creatures fall onto the ancient ground. The trees groan in sorrow, and then a ripple appears, not in the water of the lake, but in the very fabric of space and time. A shimmering portal opens. It is a Celebi from a future that has not yet occurred. and then another portal, a Celebi from a past that is long gone. They descend together, moving as one. They are not separate beings trying to help a friend. They are the same soul, the same consciousness that played the pristine gardens of the past, the same consciousness that battled the Marauder. They are the infinite expression of a single being, experiencing itself across the corridor of centuries. They touch the fallen body. A tear falls from the eyes of the future Celebi, a tear from the past Celebi. The tears merge, shimmering with pure temporal energy. The wound in the timeline is healed. The spirit returns. Celebi opens its eyes, reborn not by an outside force, but by the grace of its own eternal nature. This moment is the deepest insight into what Celebi truly is. It does not experience time as a line with a beginning and an end. It experiences time as a vast open landscape. It can see its own birth, its own death, and every precious moment in between all at once. When the present moment becomes uninhabitable, it naturally draws vitality from another moment. It is a collective consciousness spanning centuries, a chorus of voices singing the same song, acting in perfect simultaneous harmony. Every version of it exists as a living backup for every other version. It can never be truly lost, as long as the river of time continues to flow. And this energy, this life force, is not reserved for its own survival. When Celebi heals itself, it heals everything around it. This is the healing property of the voice of the forest. The stone of the eternity forest cracks, and from those ancient fissures, green shoots emerge, delicate and determined. The forest remembers how to grow. The lake of life, once tainted by the dark ball, is purified by the same gentle power, but the most profound healing is felt by the human spirit's standing witness. The boy from the past, Sam, carried the burden of a broken promise for nearly 6 decades. He lost his friend. He lost his connection to the forest. His entire life was shaped by that moment of departure. Meeting Celebi again, seeing it whole, seeing it victorious over corruption, it did not just heal the Pokémon, it healed the man. It allowed him to let go of the grief he had held for a lifetime. Celebi's energy is a gentle force. It does not erase pain. It simply reminds the spirit that growth is still possible, that spring always follows winter, that even the deepest wounds can become the soil for new life. It reminds the heart that nothing is ever truly gone. It is just waiting to be remembered. The resurrection cycle is the quintessential truth of Celebi. It is the living proof that death is not an end, but a door that opens onto the infinite corridor of time. But what happens when the entire world is trapped in a doorless room? What happens when the cycle of time itself is broken, and every living being is frozen in a moment of absolute darkness? That was the crisis explored in the Mystery Dungeon Connection, where time stopped spinning entirely, and the only hope was a shimmering guide from the future, holding the key to the past. Before we dive deeper into this incredible journey, I'm curious, where in the world are you watching this from? Drop a comment below and let our global community know. And if you're finding this as mind-blowing as I am, hit that like button to help more people discover this story. The cycle of resurrection paints a portrait of Celebi as a being unbound by the linear arrow of cause and effect, a single consciousness stretched across the stem of time, meeting itself at crucial points of pain and renewal. But there is another branch in the great tree of this creature's mythology, one where its purpose shifts from guardian of a single forest to architect of an entire planet's future. This is the narrative of the Pokémon Mystery Dungeon series, specifically the world of Explorers of Time, Explorers of Darkness, and Explorers of Sky. In the Mystery Dungeon universe, the world is a fragile place, shaped entirely by the whims of time. The player arrives in a world inhabited by Pokémon, a human transformed into a Pokémon, burdened with a terrifying gift, the ability to see the future. And what they see is a world frozen solid, not by ice, but by the complete cessation of time itself. A planet paralyzed, a grey, silent canvas where Pokémon stand eternally mid-step, their lives caught in a single, endless moment of stillness. To prevent this future, The narrative introduces a small, determined team, a Grovyle from the future, a human-turned Pokémon from the present, and their partner. But the thread that connects all of these points is Celebi. In this story, Celebi is not merely a passive observer of history, it is an active agent. It is Celebi who recognizes the hero's destiny. It is Celebi who opens the gateway through time, providing the vessel for the journey. Without its intervention, the past cannot reach the future. It sacrifices its own presence in the timeline to ensure the mission can be fulfilled. This is a Celebi, acting as the living bridge between two collapsing eras. And here a unique facet emerges. The Celebi that appears in Explorers of Sky is not the familiar forest guardian from the Johto region. It is a shiny Celebi, tinted with a soft luminous pink, often referred to as the pink guardian of the future timeline. Its personality is markedly distinct from the traditional guardian of Ilex. It carries a knowing sadness, a quiet playfulness that feels bittersweet, a profound burden. It seems to be in on a secret that no one else fully understands. It holds the keys to the timeline, and it chooses its words carefully, as if it can see all the possible futures spinning off from every single conversation. It is cautious, yet desperately hopeful. The mission itself is absolute. The mission is the prevention of the planet's paralysis, the freezing of time. In the future timeline, a rogue primal Dialga has lost control. The flow of time has stopped completely. The shiny Celebi is the last light in this dead world. It maintains the time gears, the very heartbeats of chronology, keeping them spinning in a world where nothing else moves. It cannot leave. It must stay, holding a solitary vigil at the end of the world, powering the hope that the past can be rewritten. The sensory landscape here is deeply distinct. Instead of the gentle rustle of Ilex forest, we have the hollow hum of the temporal tower. Instead of the glow of fireflies, we have the smooth pastel radiance of the time gears. The silence of the frozen world is a physical presence in the scene. It is a silence that Faishani Celebi has learned to inhabit all alone. There is a deep melancholy in this version of Celebi. While the primary Celebi of the forest represents the natural cycle of growth, death and rebirth, the shiny Celebi of the Mystery Dungeon timeline represents a cycle that was broken and must be manually repaired. It is a mechanic of time, stranded inside a broken engine, alone at the far edge of history. And yet, it hopes, it guides, it sends its friends back on a mission it knows will erase its own existence, or at least the suffering it has witnessed. It is a creature of pure, selfless will. This is a Celebi that was forged in the crucible of a dying world, and it carries the scars of that formation in its gentle, knowing eyes. This version of Celebi resolves the arc of the collective consciousness by splitting it in two. The main timeline Celebi heals the forest. The Mystery Dungeon Celebi heals the entire timeline, and it pays a price for that reach. It is isolated in a role that no other version of this being must fill. It is the pink guardian of the future. And what does it mean to guard a future that technically should never exist? That is the question at the heart of our next step. Because while the forest guardian heals the past, this pink guardian of the future stands as a testament to a sacrifice that reshapes our entire understanding of what it truly means to be a keeper of time. In the timeline where the world faced total paralysis, there was one being who refused to abandon that dying future, and her name was the shiny Celebi. While the hero and their partner escaped through the rift to save the past, this pink guardian made a choice that would define the entire Mystery Dungeon saga. It was not a decision made in haste, nor one born from despair. It was a quiet, deliberate act of love for a world already lost. You have to understand the weight of that moment. In the Pokémon Mystery Dungeon world of Explorers of Time, Darkness and Sky, the future had been frozen by the collapse of time itself. The sun hung motionless in a sky that never changed. Pokémon turned to stone in the middle of their daily lives. Entire forests stood still, not dead, but suspended in a breath they could never exhale. And yet, within that silent graveyard of a planet, the shiny Celebi fluttered through the stillness like a lone firefly lighting a tomb. She was the only Pokémon who could still move, still think, still feel hope, because she was the only one who could travel across the very fabric that had broken. A bond with Grovyle began long before the player character ever set foot in that future. Together, they had been the architects of a desperate plan to steal the time gears from their pedestals across history. Grovyle was a fugitive from a dead world, his soul consumed by the mission of resurrecting a time that had rejected him, and Celebi was his navigator, his anchor, his only companion in the emptiness. They shared meals in ruins where no food grew. They planned heists under a starless sky. They argued about the ethics of stealing the past. And they laughed at the absurdity of two Pokémon trying to rewrite creation. But the most telling detail is the way the shiny Celebi chose to stay. When the hero and Grovyle finally retrieved the last time gear and prepared to return to the past, she could have gone with them. The portal was open. The path to a living, breathing world was right there, and she could have been free. Instead, she hesitated. She turned back to look at the frozen future one last time, not because she was afraid of the past, but because she knew that if she left, the future would collapse entirely. The timeline would snap. The world she had known, however broken, was still a thread in the tapestry, and someone had to hold it steady while the others wove the new fabric. Grovyle knew what she was doing. He could see it in her eyes. There was no dramatic farewell, no long speech. He simply nodded, and she nodded back. That was their bond, built on years of shared survival, a language that required no words. The shiny Celebi lifted her glowing wings and turned toward the heart of the future, where the paralysis was thickest, and she flew. She flew into the center of the static world, and there she remained, a single point of motion in an ocean of stillness. She became the anchor, the one who would wait and watch and hope so that the past could be reborn. And that is the ultimate sacrifice she made. Not her life, but her freedom. The shiny Celebi trapped herself in a dying timeline, knowing full well that even if the heroes succeeded, she might never see them again. Because time travel is not a simple door. Once the past is changed, the future that spawned it is erased, replaced by a new branch. The world she stayed in would never truly exist again. She would be alone forever, in a pocket of history that no longer had a cause. But she chose it anyway, because the bond she shared with Grovyle and the hero was worth more than her own escape. When you think about what makes Celebi special beyond the time travel and the forest lore, this is the heart of it. The shiny Celebi was not a legendary figure demanding worship. She was a friend who chose to stay in a house made of ashes, so that her friends could build a new one in the sun. That is the pink guardian of the future, the one who closed her eyes and let the paralysis take her, not as a victim, but as a keeper of the flame. And yet, even before her time in the mystery dungeon, there was another artifact connected to Celebi, a stone said to hold the power of purification. The Relic stone and the rangers who stood watch over it would tell a different kind of story, one where Celebi's gift for healing was tested against a shadow that threatened to devour all light. But that is a tale for another chapter. The bond between Celebi and Grovyle in that dying future was one of quiet tragedy, a partnership forged across time itself. But there is another story where Celebi's role as a healer takes a very different form, one that shifts the focus from the soft green of forests to the cold, shadowed corruption of human ambition. This is the tale of the Relic Stone and the Rangers, and the moment when Celebi stepped directly into the battle against the Cypher organization. Cypher was not a name whispered among the usual Pokémon criminals. They were methodical, their reach extending far beyond the borders of awe. Their goal was simple: to turn Pokémon into weapons, stripping them of emotion and will through a process that left them as hollow fighting machines. Shadow Pokémon. The process was cruel, and it required vast energy. But where Cypher saw only power, the natural world offered a counterforce in the form of ancient relics, forgotten by time. In the Fiora region, known for its rangers rather than traditional trainers, there stood a relic stone. It was not a shrine like the one in Ilex Forest, but something older, carved from a material that seemed to hum with a resonance older than the trees themselves. The stone was a node, a focal point where the energies of the earth and the time stream converged, and it was here that Celebi would manifest, not as a passive guardian of a single forest, but as an active purifying force. The Rangers were the first to notice the anomaly. They had been tracking a series of shadow Pokémon sightings, creatures that had escaped from Cypher's labs or were deployed during raids. These Pokémon were dangerous, unpredictable. Their hearts locked behind a wall of artificial darkness. Standard capture methods failed. A Pokéball could hold them, but it could not undo the damage. The only known method of purification was through the Relic Stone, but the stone required a catalyst, a being capable of channeling its ancient energies. That being was Celebi. When the Rangers finally secured the Relic Stone's location, they sent out a signal, a call that resonated through the forest. It was not a command, but a plea, and Celebi answered. It emerged from a shimmering rift in the air, its eyes glowing with the soft light of 1,000 mornings. It flew to the stone, landing gently on its surface, and began to sing. Not a sound audible to human ears, but a vibration that travelled through the ground, through the rock, through the very fabric of time. The Relic Stone started to pulse, a deep emerald light spreading outward in expanding rings. The shadow Pokémon, brought to the site by the Rangers, recoiled at first. The darkness around them writhed, fighting the energy, but Celebi did not stop. It used the stone as a conduit, drawing on the timeline itself, not to travel but to rewind the corruption. The ancient energies of the stone acted like a lens, focusing Celebi's time-manipulating power into a narrow beam of pure life force. The shadow Pokémon's eyes flickered, the darkness cracked, and then, with a final shudder, it dissolved, leaving behind a creature that blinked in confusion, then peace. This was no small feat. Each purification drained Celebi, because the stone could only channel what it was given. The process required Celebi to remain connected to the stone for minutes, sometimes hours, while the Rangers kept the area secure from Cypher's operatives. The interaction between Celebi and the Cypher organization was not a direct confrontation. Celebi never fought them with claws or psychic blasts. Instead, it fought through restoration, through the slow, patient unraveling of their work. Each purified Pokémon was a statement that no amount of technological perversion could permanently sever the bond between a creature and the world it belonged to. The Relic Stone itself became a symbol of resistance. It was built from minerals that predated the known regions, possibly formed during a time when the Earth was still young, and the flow of time was less rigid. Celebi's ability to coexist in two separate time periods allowed it to align the stone's energy with a moment before the corruption had ever taken hold. In essence, it told the stone a story of a Pokémon that had never been Shadow, and the stone made that story real. There is a deeper implication here. The Relic Stone was not merely a tool, it was a repository of memory. Every purification left an echo in the stone, a record of Celebi's presence. Rangers who later visited the site reported feeling a strange warmth, a sense that the forest around them was holding its breath. Some claimed they could hear the faint sound of wind chimes. Even when there was no wind, it was the sound of Celebi working. Even long after it had departed, the Cypher organization never fully understood what they were up against. They believed shadow Pokémon were an unstoppable weapon, but they underestimated the resilience of nature's oldest ally. Celebi did not destroy their labs or expose their leaders. It simply healed, one by one, the victims they left behind, and every healing further strengthened the Relic Stone, turning it into a beacon that could no longer be ignored. This chapter of Celebi's story is often overlooked, overshadowed by the grand time travel adventures in Mystery Dungeon, or the movie with the Iron-Masked Marauder, but the quiet work of the Ranger teams and the ancient stone reveals something essential. Celebi is not just a guardian of forests, it is a guardian of balance, of the line between what is natural and what is forced. The Relic Stone was a tool, but the will behind it was never the stone's, it was Celebi's. And yet, for all that official lore, there is another layer to this story that exists in the memories of players who grew up in the early days of the internet. Rumours, whispers, fragments of code and hearsay, the myths that surrounded Celebi before the games ever confirmed them. Before the Ilex Shrine event was made real. Before the Relic Stone was even coded into the Ranger games. There was a playground legend that captured the imagination of a generation. That legend, and the strange truth behind it, is exactly what we will explore in the next chapter. The playground rumours of the 2000s. The Relic Stone in Fjord was a place of quiet power, a convergence of natural energy where the veil between time and the physical world seemed thinner than anywhere else. When Celebi appeared there alongside the Rangers, it was to purify the shadow Pokémon that Cypher had twisted into tools of chaos, and then it vanished, carried off on currents only it could perceive. The Forest Guardians had done their work, and the world returned to a fragile peace. But while the Rangers in Fori knew the truth of Celebi's visit firsthand, the rest of the Pokémon world was left to wonder. How could an ordinary trainer ever hope to meet a mythical Pokémon without attending a special event? The answer, for many children in the early 2000s, lay not in official channels, but in the whispers of schoolyards and the glowing screens of dial-up internet. The rumour was deceptively simple. In the Johto region, at the heart of Ilex Forest, stood a wooden shrine. It was small, tucked against a grove of ancient trees, with a worn plaque and a bowl that sometimes held offerings of berries or flowers. The game's code offered no trigger there, no hidden flag, but players believed, with the fierce certainty that only playground logic can produce, that the shrine was a dormant summoning point. The key to activating it was the Rainbow Wing, a sacred feather you could obtain in gold and silver by visiting the bell tower after capturing Ho-Oh, and the Silver Wing, obtained in the same manner but tied to Lugia. If you brought both wings to the Ilex Shrine and pressed A in exactly the right spot, so the story went, Celebi would descend from the canopy, chirp once, and join your party. No event needed, no distribution cartridges, just a simple, elegant secret that Game Freak had hidden in plain sight. Of course, the rumour was entirely false. There was no such trigger. The shrine was originally built, according to Game Freak artist Hironobu Yoshida, as nothing more than background detail, assembled from leftover sprite parts to give the forest a sense of history. It had no intended function, no hidden event, no coded response to the wings. Yet the myth spread with the speed of a forest fire in dry grass. Schoolyards across the world became echo chambers for the theory. I remember hearing it myself in the early 2000s, standing by the chain link fence during recess. A friend insisting that his cousin's friend had actually done it, had seen Celebi appear on the screen for just a second before the game froze. The story always had that caveat, the technical failure that prevented proof. It was never someone's own save file. It was always a friend of a friend, a distant connection that could not be verified. The internet accelerated the rumour beyond the reach of any physical playground. Early Pokémon forums like the ones on GameFAQs or the now defunct Poke community were filled with threads titled, "How to get Celebi with the Rainbow Wing and Silver Wing," each one a variation on the same theme. Some posts claimed you had to stand in a specific tile for 30 seconds. Others insisted you needed to have cleared the Elite four times. A few even said you had to hold down the B button while talking to the shrine, a trick that supposedly worked for all hidden Pokémon. The forums were a jungle of speculation, and every new twist was added to the growing pile of misinformation. No one wanted to admit they had not succeeded, because that would mean they were not dedicated enough. So the myth persisted, reinforced by confirmation bias and the human longing for a shortcut to the extraordinary. Game Freak, for their part, were baffled. In interviews years later, members of the development team recounted hearing about the Rainbow Wing and Silver Wing summoning ritual, and having no idea where it came from. They had never programmed such a mechanic, never intended for the shrine to be anything more than a quiet decoration. The rumor had become so widespread that some players refused to believe the official statements. They thought Game Freak was hiding the truth, protecting a secret too powerful to be freely shared. The studio eventually leaned into the legend, embracing the fan creativity rather than fighting it. When HeartGold and SoulSilver were released in 2009 and 2010, the Ilex shrine was given a new purpose. This time, if you had a legitimate Celebi from a previous event, you could take it to the shrine and trigger a special encounter with a wild Celebi. One that would then allow you to travel back in time to witness the story of the forest's creation. It was a graceful acknowledgement of a rumor that had never been true, but had become true in the hearts of millions. The playground rumors of the 2000s were not unique to Celebi. Every generation of Pokémon has its own urban legends, from the truck next to the S, and hiding Mew to the myth that pressing start 100 times near a certain rock would summon a rare creature. What made the Rainbow Wing and Silver Wing Shrine theory different was its staying power. It was not about a single trick or a glitch. It was about a narrative that felt right. A story that connected two of the most powerful legendary birds to the smallest, most innocent of mythical Pokémon. The wings were proof of your journey, symbols of your triumph over the towers of Johto. Bringing them to the forest shrine felt like a pilgrimage, a way to honor the guardian of time by offering it the essence of the sky and the rainbow. The rumor satisfied a deep emotional need, the desire for a meaningful, player-driven encounter with something sacred. And so the myth survived, passed from child to child, forum to forum, until it became part of the game's folklore. Even after HeartGold and SoulSilver provided the official encounter, the old story persisted in corners of the internet where nostalgia reigns. It is a reminder that the boundaries between creation and consumption are porous. Players do not just play the game, they inhabit it, they reinterpret it. Sometimes they build a secret room in the architecture of their imagination and call it real. Game Freak, to their credit, listened. They did not mock the rumor or dismiss it as childish nonsense. They wove it into the fabric of the remake, turning a falsehood into a canon event. It is a rare and beautiful thing when a company trusts its audience enough to honor their stories, even the ones that were never meant to be told. That trust would be tested again in the years that followed, as more elaborate rumors and missing pieces surfaced. But for now, as the sun sets on the schoolyards of the early 2000s, we can leave the Ilex shrine with a new understanding that sometimes the most powerful secrets are not hidden in code, but in the shared belief that they exist. And that belief, if held long enough, can shape reality itself. It is a lesson that would prepare the players for what came next. When Game Freak decided to make another rumor real, bringing the forgotten mystery of the GS Ball back into the light, and giving the shrine a new story to tell in the remakes of HeartGold and SoulSilver. The rumors of the Ilex forest were persistent. For a generation of players, the idea that the Rainbow Wing and the Silver Wing could unlock the forest's deepest secret was practically accepted as truth, even if the game itself never acknowledged it. But Game Freak was listening, and when the time came to revisit Johto, to rebuild Gold and Silver from the ground up for the Nintendo DS, they saw an opportunity, not just to add a missing Pokémon, but to turn those playground whispers into a foundational piece of the region's lore. HeartGold and SoulSilver arrived in 2009, and with them came the shrine. The wooden structure at the edge of Ilex Forest was no longer just a background detail stitched together from leftover sprite parts. It had presence. It sat in the shadow of ancient trees, wrapped in the sound of running water and rustling leaves, quietly waiting for a visitor who could cross the streams of time. The developers had finally implemented the Celebi event, but the trigger was not the wings that the schoolyard kids had sworn by. The trigger was something stranger. something that required the intervention of the Pokémon itself. You needed a Celebi that had been marked by destiny, a fateful encounter Celebi, a specific time traveler brought to the shrine through one of the limited distribution events. This was the point where the developers looked directly at a gate of fanfiction. And you were right. But it was never that simple. The secret to the forest was not a pair of wings that belonged to legendary birds. The secret was the forest's own guardian, brought home and asked to share its memory. When you had that Celebi in your party, and you stepped up to the shrine, the world didn't just change, it folded. The screen shimmered, the grass around you began to pulse with a soft green light, and the gentle music of the forest twisted into something ancient and drifting. Celebi had always been called the voice of the forest, but here it revealed itself as the hand of time. The journey took you backward, not into a history book or a cutscene, but into a living, breathing memory that the soil and the roots had held onto for decades. You found yourself in a past Johto, a time before the player character was born, before the current peace had settled over the region. The shrine was gone, replaced by a simple clearing bathed in a golden haze. And standing in that clearing was a man you recognized, though he was younger, sharper, dressed in the strict black uniform of a Team Rocket executive. He was not alone. He had a child with him, a boy with red hair, standing slightly apart, watching with eyes that held the same fire they would carry into the future. The boy was Silver. The man was Giovanni. In this single, quiet moment, a scene that lasted no longer than a few breaths, Celebi revealed the truth that the franchise had danced around for years. The rival, the antagonist, the boy who stole a Pokémon from Professor Elm in a storm of anger and insecurity, was the son of the Team Rocket boss. It was not told through dialogue or a dramatic confrontation. It was shown, a memory offered by the forest itself, a wound healed not by erasing it, but by allowing it to be witnessed. The father was there, and then he was gone, abandoning his son to the same path of darkness that he had walked himself. The forest had invited you in for a reason, not to capture a rare creature, but to understand a narrative that had been hiding beneath the surface of Johto since the games first began. The cycle of neglect, the echo of a parent's shadow, the quiet tragedy of a boy who never knew why he was left behind. And Celebi, the guardian of peace, the keeper of the timeline, had decided that the only way to truly heal the forest and the future was to expose this broken relationship for what it was. This secret, this bond between parent and child, set the stage for the confrontation with Giovanni that was brewing beneath the surface of the Johto region for a long, long time. It was a story that began with a thief in the night and ended with a father and son facing each other across a decade of silence. The previous chapter ended with Game Freak finally turning a playground rumor into reality, allowing you to bring Celebi to the Ilex shrine in HeartGold and SoulSilver. But that event didn't just let you catch a mythical Pokémon. It unlocked a hidden narrative sequence, one that reaches across time to bring closure to a story that began in the very first generation of Pokémon. This is the story of how Celebi brought you face to face with Giovanni, the exiled leader of Team Rocket, and the ethical weight of watching your own past unfold. You see, in the original Gold and Silver games, Giovanni had vanished after the events of Red and Blue. His team scattered, and the remnants of Team Rocket in Johto were left aimless, their leader nowhere to be found. But the Generation Y remakes added a quiet, haunting layer to his absence. Through the power of the fate-sighted Celebi, you could travel to the past, to the very moment before everything fell apart for the Rocket leader. This is where Celebi's ability becomes something more than a plot device. It becomes a lens for understanding. Celebi doesn't just move through time. It can show you what the past was like, but it can also let you walk alongside it. When you take Celebi to the Ilex Forest Shrine, after obtaining the GS Ball in HeartGold and SoulSilver, the forest begins to shimmer, the air grows still, and then the path opens, leading you not forward, but back to a time when Team Rocket was still a force, when Giovanni still believed He could control the legendary birds. You find yourself in a hidden chamber beneath the Goldenrod radio tower. But not the one you know from the present day. This is a version of the past, untouched by the chaos of the takeover. And there, standing alone, is Giovanni. He speaks to you, not as an enemy, but as a man who has already lost everything. He tells you about his father, about the ancient Mew that his father had tried to control, and about the failure that has haunted his bloodline. He speaks of his desire to find a Pokémon that could manipulate time to undo his mistakes. And then he looks at the Celebi floating beside you. Celebi does not hide. It reveals itself willingly, because it knows something Giovanni does not. The meeting is not a battle. It is a confrontation of meaning. Giovanni asks you to join him, to help him rebuild Team Rocket. You refuse. And in that refusal, the future is sealed. He walks away into the shadows and disappears from the timeline entirely. The narrative closure is not just for the player, it is for the world of Johto. You have witnessed the moment the villain gave up, and that knowledge, carried back to your own time, lets you understand why the Team Rocket in Johto was so feeble, why the organization fell apart. But there is an ethical dimension here that lingers. Celebi allowed you to see your own past, to interact with a version of the world that no longer exists. You were a ghost in that time, a visitor who could change nothing, except the understanding you took away. Is it right to let humans witness their own history like that? To see the moment a man's heart broke, knowing you cannot comfort him or change what he will do? Celebi seems to believe that knowledge is a form of healing, but it is a quiet, melancholic power. It does not offer to let you fix the past. It offers only the chance to accept it. And that acceptance is what closes the Johto storyline. After that encounter, Team Rocket is no longer a threat. The remnants fade. The story of the region moves on. But the resonance of that moment, the confrontation that was not a battle, remains. It is a gift from Celebi, a chance to understand why villains become who they are and to let them go. This idea of time as a force that can be witnessed but not rewritten leads us to a deeper question. What if Celebi's ability is not just a tool for travel, but a reflection of a greater cosmic order? What if the Forest Guardian is actually a servant of something much older, something that governs the very flow of time itself? That is the mystery we will unravel next in Chapter 18, the Servant of Dialga theory. That confrontation with Giovanni, where Celebi dropped you into the past to face the exiled Team Rocket leader, was a strange kind of narrative closure. It wasn't just about defeating a villain. It was about using time itself to resolve a wound that had festered since the early days of the Johto region. And it raises an obvious question. If Celebi can pluck you from one era and set you down in another, if it can navigate the currents of history with such precision, what is its relationship to the being who is said to govern time itself? Dialga, the Pokémon that commands the flow of all temporal energy, the master of the fourth dimension. How do these two entities coexist in the same multiverse? This is where a long-running fan theory begins to take shape, one that positions Celebi not as a rival or an equal to Dialga, but as a kind of subordinate, a servant, an agent of the microflow, while Dialga oversees the macro continuum. It's a theory that emerged from the obsessive lore hunting of early Pokémon forums, where fans tried to reconcile the apparent overlap between a time-traveling forest guardian and the literal god of time. Let's examine the hierarchy of temporal power as it's presented in the games. Dialga is often referred to as the controller of time. In Pokémon Diamond and Pearl, it is said to have the power to warp time itself. It can speed it up, slow it down, stop it, or reverse it. Its very heartbeat is the pulse of the timeline, and its roar can shatter the boundaries between seconds and centuries. Dialga operates on a universal scale. Its domain is the entire flow of existence, from the Big Bang to the heat death of everything. Celebi, by contrast, is a creature of local disturbances. It can travel through time, yes. It can ferry others through history, but it doesn't seem to have Dialga's absolute authority. Celebi cannot rewrite the timeline at will. It can only move along it, like a leaf drifting on a river. It can intervene in small moments, heal a wounded forest, bring a person from one year to another, but it cannot reverse the creation of the universe or restore a species that has been extinct for millennia, at least not without help. The theory goes like this. Dialga is the executive, the one who sets the laws of temporal physics, but even a god cannot micromanage every second of every timeline across infinite dimensions. So Dialga delegates. It creates or designates lesser beings to handle the day-to-day maintenance of the timeline. The little nudges and corrections that keep history from fraying, and one of those beings is Celebi. Celebi manages the microflow. It handles the small-scale time travel, the healing of past wounds, the preservation of specific ecosystems, and the response to localized temporal anomalies. In this framework, Celebi is less a free agent and more a kind of cosmic park ranger, tasked with keeping the Forest of Time healthy at the ground level. The Ilex Forest Shrine is not just a place of worship. It may be a point of contact, a kind of station where Celebi receives its instructions from the greater temporal order. The shrine might even be a resonance point, a location where the energies of Dialga's macro continuum bleed down into the microflow, allowing Celebi to anchor its travel. There is some subtle evidence for this in the games. In Pokémon Mystery Dungeon, explorers of time and darkness and sky, Celebi is depicted as a guide who helps the hero travel through time to prevent a cataclysm. But in that game, Dialga is a central figure, and at one point the player even confronts a corrupted, primal Dialga. Celebi never claims authority over time. It simply offers its services, its ability to move through the hours and days. It is a tool, albeit a willing and compassionate one. Moreover, in the movie The Voice of the Forest, when Celebi is mortally wounded and the Forest of Eternity is dying, it does not fix the timeline itself. It prays to Arceus, the creator of all things, and Arceus intervenes. This suggests that Celebi, for all its temporal talent, has a ceiling. It cannot rewrite major events without help from a higher power. Dialga, on the other hand, is never shown praying for aid when it comes to time. It is the source. So the fan theory paints a picture of a structured multiverse. At the top sits Arceus, the Alpha who created everything. Below him are the legendary trio of time, space, and antimatter. Dialga governs time in its grand, sweeping majesty. Palkia governs space. Giratina governs the distortion world, the realm of chaos and antimatter. And then, at a lower tier, there are mythicals like Celebi, who serve as agents of the temporal order. Celebi handles the microflow. It makes sure the little things don't break. It prevents paradoxes from forming by carefully managing the encounters that humans and Pokémon have with the past and future. But what does this mean for the stability of the multiverse? If Celebi is indeed Dialga's subordinate, then its role becomes critical. The macro continuum is only as stable as the microflow that supports it. A single unchecked temporal anomaly, a moment where someone from the future alters a key event in the past, could ripple upward and create a fracture in Dialga's grand design. Celebi is the first line of defense. It is the eyes and ears of time on the ground. It monitors the forest, the living world, and the small moments that connect us all. Without Celebi, Dialga would have to micromanage every leaf that falls in every forest across every timeline. That would be inefficient, perhaps impossible even for a god. So Celebi exists as a necessary function of the temporal ecosystem. It is not a rival to Dialga. It is an extension of Dialga's will, albeit one with its own gentle personality and love for life. The theory also helps explain why Celebi is so often linked to healing and peace. A microflow agent must be gentle. If it were aggressive, it might create more wounds than it heals. Celebi's psychic and grass typing, its connection to forests and life, all align with the idea of maintenance and restoration. It is the gardener of time, pruning the branches of history so that the tree does not become diseased. Now, if Celebi is the servant of Dialga, what does that make the other legendary from the distortion world? There is a being that governs antimatter, chaos, and the spaces between, a being that some fans believe is Celebi's natural opposite, the one who exists outside the order of time and space altogether. That is a story for our next chapter, where we will explore the ancient counterpoint to this gentle guardian, and how the two may have been locked in a silent balancing act since the beginning of the multiverse. The tension between order and chaos, between healing and entropy, will lead us deep into the dark corners of Pokémon lore. But for now, rest in the knowledge that time has its caretakers, and one of them is watching over the forests as you sleep. If the last chapter left you considering Celebi as a quiet servant to the god of time, then tonight we need to turn that idea on its head, because there is another force in the Pokémon universe that operates entirely outside Dialga's domain. A being that doesn't just manage microflows or macro continuums, but exists as the very opposite of order itself. And in that opposition, Celebi may not be a servant at all. It may be the only thing standing in the way of absolute chaos. Let's talk about Giratina, the renegade Pokémon, the ruler of the distortion world, a creature that was banished by its creator, Arceus, for being too violent, too destructive to exist in the normal fabric of reality. Where Dialga commands the flow of time and Palkia governs the dimensions of space, Giratina was given the distortion world, a realm of antimatter and raw, untamed entropy. A place where the laws of physics break down, where up becomes down, where past and future bleed into one another in a mess of pure instability. It's a prison, yes, but it's also a throne. And from that throne, Giratina watches the real world with an ancient, patient hunger. Now consider Celebi, small, fragile, gentle, a creature that cannot even appear unless the world around it is at peace. On the surface, they couldn't be more different. One is a force of destruction, the other a symbol of renewal. But the deeper lore suggests something more profound. That Celebi was placed in the world specifically to counter Giratina's influence. That the two are locked in a cosmic balance, like light and shadow, growth and decay, order and chaos. And if that's true, then the distortion world isn't just a separate dimension. It's the negative space that Celebi's life energy holds back. Let's start with their powers. Giratina's domain is antimatter. It can tear apart the fabric of reality, open portals to its twisted dimension, and drag anything into a place where time and space don't function properly. It is the embodiment of absolute negation, the force that unmakes what exists. Celebi, on the other hand, is the embodiment of absolute affirmation. Its power is not to destroy but to create, to heal, to bring life where there was none. When Celebi appears, forests bloom, dead wood sprouts new leaves, injured Pokémon recover. Even the atmosphere around it feels charged with a kind of gentle, persistent vitality. This is not just a thematic contrast, it's a structural one. In the Pokémon world, antimatter and life energy are fundamentally opposed. Giratina's influence warps reality into a state where life cannot survive. The distortion world is a barren wasteland of floating rock and gravity-defying platforms, devoid of any plant or animal. Nothing grows there, nothing lives there. It is the ultimate expression of entropy, a place that has been stripped of all vitality. And Celebi is the opposite. Its entire existence is focused on growth. It can revitalize an entire forest in moments, restore a dying Pokémon to full health, and even reverse death itself, as seen in the anime when it brought a fallen Celebi back to life, where Giratina unmakes, Celebi remakes. Now, here's where the theory gets really interesting. Some researchers and lore enthusiasts have proposed that Celebi's time-traveling ability is not just a random power, it's specifically designed to prevent Giratina from breaking through the barriers between dimensions. Think about it. The distortion world exists in a state of constant flux. Time there doesn't flow in a straight line. It loops, it splits, it collapses. For Giratina to enter the real world, it has to find a weak point in the fabric of space-time, a place where the boundaries between dimensions are thin, and those weak points often appear when time itself is disrupted, when paradoxes occur, when past, present, and future collide. Celebi's role then becomes clear. By travelling through time and ensuring that the timeline remains coherent, Celebi closes those weak points. It repairs the rips in reality that Giratina would exploit. It's not just a guardian of the forest, it's a guardian of the natural order, a living patch for the holes that antimatter would tear. And the most fascinating part, Celebi does this not through combat, but through life. Because the distortion world cannot manifest where life is strong. Where there is vitality, there is stability. Where there is growth, there is order. Celebi's ability to flourish life acts as a natural barrier against Giratina's influence. Because antimatter cannot thrive in a space that is full of positive energy. Think of it like this. If Giratina is a disease that wants to corrupt the world into chaos, then Celebi is the immune system. It doesn't fight the disease head-on. It strengthens the body of the world so the disease cannot take hold. Every forest Celebi revitalizes, every tree it grows, every seed it plants is a tiny fortress against the encroaching entropy. The distortion world might be a prison, but it's a prison that can only hold Giratina as long as the real world remains healthy. And that health depends on creatures like Celebi. This theory also explains why Celebi is so reclusive, why it only appears in times of peace. It cannot afford to waste energy. Every moment it spends in the open, every time it reveals itself to humans, it's expending the very life force that keeps the barrier strong. When Celebi arrives, it's not just for a visit. It's checking the walls, reinforcing the foundations, making sure that no crack has formed that Giratina could slip through. And when the world is torn by war or destruction, Celebi retreats even deeper into the forest. Because those very conflicts weaken the barrier. Human violence creates chaos, and chaos is the doorway for the renegade Pokémon. There's a reason then that the distortion world is never found near Ilex Forest. It's never found near any of Celebi's sanctuaries. Because where Celebi dwells, the fabric of reality is simply too strong, too full of life for antimatter to exist. The shrine in Ilex Forest, that small wooden structure that was never meant to be a trigger for a mythical event, becomes something more in this theory. It's a focal point, a place where the natural order is at its most concentrated. The humans who built that shrine, whether they knew it or not, were marking the spot where the barrier between life and chaos is strongest. And yet we must consider the flip side. What happens when Celebi is weakened? In the anime, when the Iron-Masked Marauder captured Celebi and corrupted it with a dark ball, the creature became a force of destruction. It grew to an immense size, lost its gentle nature, and began to tear apart the very forest it was meant to protect. The trees around it withered, the ground split, the sky turned dark. For a brief moment, the world saw what happens when Celebi's life-giving power is twisted into something else. A perversion that mirrors the chaos of the distortion world. In that corrupted state, Celebi itself becomes a threat. It becomes an agent of entropy, because its power, when inverted, is just as destructive as Giratina's. Thankfully, in that story, Celebi was purified by the Lake of Life, but the implication is chilling. If Celebi can be corrupted, then the barrier it maintains can be broken. And if the barrier breaks, what stops Giratina from stepping into our world? What keeps the distortion world from bleeding into the real one? The answer is nothing. Only Celebi. Only that small, fragile creature that flutters through time and whispers to the trees. This is the heart of the theory. Celebi is not just a mythical Pokémon. It is the counterbalance to the most terrifying entity in the Pokémon universe. Where Giratina represents destruction, Celebi represents creation. Where Giratina represents chaos, Celebi represents peace. Where Giratina represents the point where everything ends, Celebi represents the point where everything begins anew. They are two sides of a coin that Arceus itself must have forged at the dawn of existence, one to govern the inevitable decay of all things, and the other to ensure that decay is never absolute, that life always finds a way to return. And that brings us to the sound of the sacred grove, the rustling of leaves, the murmur of a stream, the distant call of a wild Pokémon. These are not just ambient noises. They are the voice of the entity that keeps the darkness at bay. In the next part of this story, we'll listen more closely to what that grove is saying, because the forest has secrets that go far beyond the visible world. For now, rest in the knowledge that while you sleep, somewhere in a forest in Johto, a tiny guardian is keeping watch, and as long as the trees stand, the chaos cannot enter. The last chapter drew a line between the chaos of the distortion world and the peace of the forest. Life and peace versus antimatter and chaos. The distortion world is defined by its emptiness, its lack of structure, the overwhelming hum of nothing trying to become something. But if that is the ultimate absence, then the sacred grove is the ultimate presence. It is not defined by what is missing, but by what is heard. The shift from the distortion world is not merely a change in location, it is a change in the fabric of every sensation. Where Giratina's home is a silent scream, Ilex forest is a whispered, living breath. This is the soundscape of the sacred grove. The first thing you notice is the absence of emptiness. The air here is not stagnant, it moves, and when it moves, it speaks. The rustling of leaves forms a constant organic whisper. It is the sound of the forest breathing. It has no single source, enveloping you from every angle. It creates a cocoon of white noise, the kind of sound that exists just below the level of active hearing, soothing the mind into a state of passive awareness. This is the fundamental layer of Celebi's domain, the foundation upon which all other sounds are built. Then the chimes. This is the element that is uniquely, undeniably psychic. The wind passes through the leaves, but the chimes are the will of the forest made tangible. In the games, when Celebi approaches, a specific set of delicate chimes underscores the environment. It is not a melody of triumph, nor a lullaby of sadness. It is the sound of recognition. If you listen closely to that chime, particularly in the original Crystal version or the refined HeartGold and SoulSilver event, there is a specific harmony used, a suspended chord, a sound that does not want to resolve. It hangs in the air a moment longer than it should, suggesting that time itself is stretching around the vibration. The chimes are the auditory signature of a temporal anomaly existing in perfect harmony with its surroundings. The music of Celebi's encounter is deliberately constructed to induce a sense of calm. There is no driving rhythm. The percussion, if it exists at all, is the soft rustle of the player's own footsteps. The composition stays high in the register, floating on the air. It mimics the physiology of peace. It lowers the heart rate. It invites you to stop, to listen, to observe, to wait. It is ethereal because it feels disconnected from the struggle of the material world. It belongs to the space between seconds. It is the sound of time waiting for nothing at all. This is how the atmosphere of a Lore for Sleep video is built from the nature of the Pokémon itself. Celebi is perfectly peaceful. It does not seek conflict. It exists to heal and to travel, so the environment reflects that internal state. The rustling leaves are not the chaos of a storm. They are the gentle shift of seasons. The chimes are not an alarm. They are a meditation bell. The entire design of Celebi's domain is an invitation to rest. It is a reminder that the most powerful beings in this universe do not need to shout to be heard. They can sustain themselves on the quiet confidence of serenity. We are invited to share in that serenity, to let the soundscape wash over us and carry the weight of the day away in the current of its melody. But this serenity is not passive. It leaves a mark. The soundscape is the result of a specific magic. The wind is shaped by the branches. The chimes resonate because the air is clear. This tranquility is literally written on the leaves and the flowers. After the sound fades, after Celebi departs, what remains is the physical proof of its presence. The forest does not just sound peaceful, it looks peaceful. The plants carry the memory of the chime. The flowers bloom in the shape of the melody. This is the deep ecology of Celebi's influence. The true signature of the Guardian is not just what you hear, but what grows from the echo of that sound. And that is the subject of our next quiet exploration, the Flora of Celebi's wake. The soundscape of the sacred grove we explored last time. Those soft chimes, the rustling of leaves, the distant hum of psychic energy. is not merely a background detail. It is the auditory signature of a physical process. It is the sound of life accelerating. When we listen to the music of Celebi's encounter, we are hearing the frequency of creation itself. But what is actually happening in that grove, beneath the soil, along the bark, and deep within the cellular memory of every plant in the forest? This is where we stop listening to the sound and start reading the language of the leaves. When Celebi manifests, it does not simply teleport into a space. It generates a localized temporal bubble where biological time runs faster than the rest of the world. The specific botanical effects of Celebi's presence on the environment are profound and immediate. It triggers what botanists would call a forced vernalization event, but wrapped in psychic causality. Seeds that have been dormant for decades sense the arrival of the guardian. They burst open. Roots drive deep into the soil. Vines weave complex patterns across the undergrowth. Flowers bloom in a cascading wave that follows the trail of Celebi's flight. The environment does not just change, it overwhelms itself with vitality. You see the instant growth of ancient trees and the revitalization of withered landscapes. Moss spreads over stone in seconds. A clearing becomes a grove becomes a forest. It is as if the land itself is taking a deep, grateful breath. To reduce this power to mere biology, though, misses the deeper point. Celebi is the embodiment of a philosophical argument given physical form. It is a symbol of environmentalism and the fight against deforestation. In the movie The Voice of the Forest, the villain does not just attack Celebi. He attacks the forest that nourishes it. He drains the lake of life. He uses a dark ball to corrupt the very essence of the guardian. And what happens when the forest's soul is corrupted? The trees do not just die, they become monstrous. They lash out, they consume. This is the warning the legend carries. Deforestation is not just the removal of wood, it's the severing of a symbiotic consciousness. Celebi's tie to the forest is absolute. It cannot exist without the forest. And without Celebi, the forest is just a collection of dying cells. It is the voice that insists the forest has a right to exist. This reliance creates a powerful narrative thread about dependence and responsibility. The shrine the humans built is not a cage or a summoning circle. It is an acknowledgement of a debt. The deal is simple. Protect the forest, and Celebi will bless it. Neglect it, and the voice falls silent. The connection is so deep that the forest itself remembers the trauma of fire and the axe. Yet, when an uncorrupted Celebi passes over a logged field, the earth does not just heal, it erases the scar. It brings life back to barren ground. It is a cycle of forgiveness, expressed through cellular regeneration. Every new leaf it grows is a direct refusal of entropy. This idea that a single point of consciousness could dictate the health of an entire biome is what makes Celebi such a special case in the Pokémon mythos. It is a deity of renewal, but for years, this deity was entirely inaccessible to most players. You could not find it in the tall grass. You could not find it in a dungeon. You had to wait for an event, or in some regions, a specific disc. The exclusivity of this experience was a direct contradiction to its message of universal growth. The story of how that treatment changed when players finally received the tools to formally enter the shrine without a ticket, finally allowed the experience to be shared by everyone, is a perfect example of how the myth of a creature can evolve to match the tools we use to experience it. This brings us directly to the chapter that chronicles this monumental shift in how the rarest Pokémon were shared with the world. That is the story of the Mythical Distribution Era. I hope you're as amazed by this as I am. If you want to stay updated on more content like this, make sure to subscribe and join our community of curious minds. Trust me, what's coming next will challenge everything you thought you knew. The landscape of Ilex Forest was shaped by roots and leaves, by the quiet power of a creature that could bend the seasons to its will. But there is another landscape entirely, one shaped not by nature but by circuits, by mail-in forms, and by limited windows of opportunity. The landscape of the real-world distribution, the botanical miracle of a single Celebi could revitalize an entire forest in an instant. But the logistical miracle of transferring that same creature into the hands of a player was a process built on deliberate scarcity, on timing, and on hardware that feels impossibly archaic today. Consider the Japanese mobile adapter for the Game Boy Color, a strange piece of plastic that tethered your handheld to a mobile phone network. To obtain Celebi in Japan in the early 2000s, you had to navigate this system. You were not hunting a Pokémon in the tall grass. You were hunting a signal in the sky. The process felt less like a capture and more like a ritual. It required patience, a specific subscription, and the willingness to treat your Game Boy as a receiver for official data. It was a bridge between the physical world and the digital, a moment where the boundaries of the game stretched into real infrastructure. Then there was Pokémon Channel, a game for the Nintendo GameCube where the primary activity was watching television featuring Pokémon. It was calm, completely passive, a perfect artifact of that console generation. But hidden within that idle experience was a secret pathway to Celebi. If you played the game and connected your Game Boy Advance to the console, Celebi would appear at a Pokémart in Ruby or Sapphire, not in a forest, not in a dungeon, in a store. It was as if the digital forest had reached through the screen and placed its guardian onto a retail shelf, the most elusive mythical, acquired by interacting with the most mundane of digital spaces. It was a fascinating juxtaposition, and it highlighted just how differently this creature was treated. This specific distribution history elevates Celebi to a unique tier of rarity when compared to its mythical peers. Deoxys, the DNA Pokémon, was distributed liberally across its debut generation. There were Aurora tickets, Earth Island events in Emerald, and multiple movie distributions that made the creature widely accessible. Giratina arrived with the Pokémon Colosseum bonus disc, a physical product you could walk into a store and purchase. You could buy the means to summon Giratina. Not so with Celebi. For years, Celebi was the unreachable entry in the Pokédex, the silhouette that remained grey for the vast majority of collectors, the one who had to be borrowed or traded from a very small pool of legitimate sources. It was the mythical that demanded you prove your dedication to the franchise. At a time when dedication meant owning very specific pieces of hardware, when you finally obtained one, the game recognized the journey. It was not just a Pokémon in a box, it was marked. It carried the fateful encounter tag. This small piece of data, this subtle ribbon in the summary screen, is a powerful thing. It means this creature did not originate in the wild. It was sent. It was gifted from a moment in time. It carries the signature of the event itself. The prestige of owning a fateful encounter Celebi is the prestige of being connected to that era, to the mobile adapters, the GameCube link cables, the specific promotional windows. It is a symbol that you were part of the infrastructure of the myth, that you were there, or that you had access to a trustworthy link to that history. This scarcity, this deliberate limitation of access, gives Celebi a weight that other Pokémon simply do not carry. It is not just a time traveler, it is a memory of a specific technological age, a time before the internet distribution became trivial, a time when acquiring a creature required multiple consoles, patience, and a willingness to engage with the physical world outside the screen. And that quiet history of distribution, the prestige of the mark, lays the foundation for a very different kind of value. A value that is tested not in the storage box, but on the battlefield of the modern competitive game. The journey from the mobile adapter to the master rank is a fascinating one, and it brings us directly into our next chapter. The story continues with Chapter 23, Celebi's role in the modern meta. Because Celebi was so rarely given out through those early distribution channels, its presence in the competitive battling scene has always been a strange story. You do not see it very often, and when you do, it feels almost like an anomaly, a relic of a specific era in the game's history. But for those who have used it, or faced it, the experience is unforgettable. The mystery of its accessibility directly influences the mystique of its utility. The player who brings a Celebi to a battle is usually someone who went through considerable real-world effort to acquire one. And that effort is often channeled into understanding the creature on a much deeper level. Because honestly, to master Celebi in a fight, you need to understand what it was designed to be, and that design starts exactly where the developers started. With Mew, the decision by Game Freak to grant Celebi a base stat total of exactly 600 is not a coincidence. It is a deliberate echo. Every single one of its stats stands at exactly 100. Hit points, attack, defense, special attack, special defense, speed, all 100. This mirrors Mew's spread identically. Mew was the first mythical Pokémon, and it was built to be a blank slate, capable of learning every technical machine and hidden machine in the game. Celebi cannot learn everything, but its stats are a reflection of that same philosophy of balance. Where Mew represents the potential of all knowledge, Celebi represents the perfect equilibrium of nature itself. The forest does not specialize. It is not purely aggressive or purely defensive. It adapts. A tree cannot outrun a storm, but it can sway. It can endure. A river cannot block a path, but it can carve through stone over time. That is the truth of this stat spread. It has no glaring weaknesses in its base numbers, but it also lacks the explosive power of a Kyogre or the impenetrable walling potential of a Lugia. This forces the player to adopt a very specific mindset. You cannot simply overpower an opponent with Celebi. You have to outlast them. You have to outmaneuver them. You have to use time itself as a weapon. And that is where the move pool comes into play. A look at what Celebi can learn reveals a suite of tools that perfectly complement this perfectly round stat line. It has access to recover, allowing it to restore half of its maximum hit points in a single turn. This is the survival mechanism, the heartbeat of its longevity. It then has access to a wide array of coverage moves: Psychic, Giga Drain, Earth Power, Shadow Ball, Dazzling Gleam, and even Aura Sphere in certain generations. This allows it to hit a huge portion of the metagame for at least neutral damage, chipping away slowly. But the real defining characteristic of Celebi's modern competitive role is its versatility as a pivot. It learns U-turn, the bug-type move that allows the user to attack and then switch out immediately. This is a bizarre move for a mythical forest guardian to learn at first glance, but it fits the psychic nature of the creature perfectly. It allows Celebi to scout the opponent's moves, deliver a hit, and retreat before a counterattack can land. It is a tactical retreat in the form of an attack, a glimpse into its nature as a being that exists outside of linear time. It does not stay where it is not welcome. It flits through the battle, gathering information, wearing down the opponent, and healing whatever damage comes its way. This ability to shake off damage and debilitating status is formalized in its ability. Celebi possesses the ability Natural Cure. This is not an aggressive ability like Intimidate or Levitate. It is a passive, quiet ability, but its implications for a battle are huge. When Celebi switches out of battle, any status condition it is suffering from is instantly cured. Poison, paralysis, burn, sleep, they vanish the moment it leaves the field. Think about what this means in the context of the deep lore we have been exploring in this series. The creature dedicates itself to purifying the forest. The Lake of Life heals the corrupted Celebi in the movie. The shrine in Ilex Forest is a place of cleansing and balance. Natural Cure is the gameplay manifestation of this role. It is the healer. In a competitive environment where status moves like Thunderwave and Toxic are paramount for controlling the flow of battle, Celebi acts as an absolute counter to that entire strategy. You cannot cripple it permanently. You can poison it, but the moment it clicks U-turn, or simply makes a manual switch to a teammate, poison disappears. The rot is cleansed. This gives the player immense freedom. You can switch Celebi into a predicted status move aimed at your sweeper, absorb the toxic, laugh it off, and leave. The forest takes the damage, and then it regenerates. Natural Cure is the mechanical heart of the lore of the healer. Of course, the modern competitive landscape has not always been kind to this little sprite. The rise of powerful dark-type threats like Tyranitar, Hydreigon, and the ubiquitous Incineroar in the double battle formats press heavily on its psychic typing. The prevalence of U-turn from Scizor and other bug types exploits its 4x weakness to the very move it loves to use itself, and its lack of a truly overpowering singular stat. Its reliance on setup moves like Nasty Plot or Calm Mind requires a level of careful positioning that faster, harder-hitting Pokémon simply do not need, but that is the point. Every time you think the meta has left Celebi behind, it finds a new role. In formats where it is legal, it often serves as the ultimate glue. A bulky grass type that resists ground and water and electric. A Pokémon with Recover and Natural Cure. A special attacker that can boost its stats or pivot out of a bad situation. The modern competitive scene, especially in the more expansive formats, rewards this kind of flexibility. It all ties back to the core identity of the creature. It is not the fighter. It is not the destroyer. It is the guardian. It watches the flow of battle and intervenes exactly where it needs to. It is the single point of stability in a chaotic landscape. It is the ancient tree in the center of the field that simply will not fall. Looking at the way Celebi operates in the competitive sphere, you see the outline of a much larger design question. Why is it so balanced? Why does it prioritize healing and escape over raw force? Its mechanics suggest a philosophy of preservation rather than domination, which perfectly reflects its role as a protector of sacred spaces. But these mechanics also suggest a deeper architectural truth about the Pokémon world. The way Celebi fights, the way its stats mirror Mew, and the way its ability cleanses Poison, these are not random decisions. They are signals pointing towards something older. The structure of its power seems to fit into a framework of cosmic balance that predates the establishment of Johto's forests entirely. The answers to why Celebi was designed this way, with this specific weight of 100 in every category, are not found only in Ilex Forest. They are buried in the ancient, cold history of the Sinnoh region, where the very concepts of time, space, and matter were first defined. The thread linking this perfect grass type to the creation trio is thin, but it is there, waiting to be pulled. And that connection is exactly where our story is heading next. Looking across the competitive history of Celebi, through the movesets and the subtle mechanics of Natural Cure, it is easy to see the creature as a tool for a battle team, but every piece of that kit is a reflection of a larger geographic truth. To understand why those healing properties exist in the first place, we have to leave the tournament grounds and stand at the edge of two very specific forests. The story of Celebi is not just a story of one grove in Johto. It is a story of how entire regions are connected by the same ancient roots. The Ilex forest in Johto is a sacred space. It is quiet, twisting, and deeply private, but it is not the only woodland of its kind. There is a geological echo of this place in the Sinnoh region, hidden within the canopy of the Eterna forest. The hidden lore links between the Ilex forest and the Eterna forest are subtle, but they are the key to understanding how the ancient people of this world viewed the divine. On the surface, one forest holds time and the other holds evolution. Ilex forest is the home of the shrine and the guardian. Eterna forest is the home of the moss rock and the old chateau. But when you look at the architecture of the places, the way the trees are allowed to grow, the specific placements of the ruins, you start to see a blueprint. The same hands that built the shrine for Celebi in Johto likely built the structures that now lay crumbling in the mists of Sinnoh. It is a connection that the games rarely speak aloud, but the geography screams it. This creates an irresistible question, a speculation that loops back to the very nature of time travel itself. We have to ask whether the shrines in different regions were built by the same ancient civilization. The evidence lies in the materials used, the specific wood grain patterns, the carvings, the offerings left at the base of the statues. The Sinnoh ruins, sitting directly between the two regions, act as the bridge. It is here that the mythology of Arceus, Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina was born, and it is here that the architectural DNA of both regions mixed into a single structure. If these people understood the creation of time and space, they certainly understood the creatures that flourished within that creation. They understood the forest, and they built sanctuaries for its protectors across the known world. The shrine in Snowpoint Temple and the shrine in Ilex Forest might be distant cousins, separated by sea but bonded by faith. And this brings us to the third thread of the evening. The recurring motif of the forest protector across the entire Pokémon franchise is one of the most consistent and comforting themes in the lore. Every generation seems to have a guardian of the deep woods. In Kalos, it is Xerneas, the bringer of life. In Alola, it is Tapu Bulu, guardian of the jungle. In Johto, it is Celebi. This motif serves a purpose. It reminds us that nature has a will, a consciousness, voice that speaks through the leaves and the wind. Celebi is the purest expression of this. It is the healer, the time traveler, the one that ensures the cycle of growth and decay remains balanced. When you fold these connections together, the story of Celebi becomes a story of an entire civilization that revered the forest. The Johto-Sinnoh Connection is the deepest, oldest layer of the Pokémon world. It is the foundation upon which the mythology of time and nature is built. The Ilex Forest and the Eterna Forest are the lungs of this world, protected by a single gentle voice. And that same voice, that same role, echoes forward into the future of the franchise. To understand exactly how this archetype evolves, we have to look at what happens when the forest needs a very different kind of protector. The gentle whisper of the Ilex Forest is not the only sound in the woods. There is a newer, wilder guardian that shares this same sacred duty, but enforces it with a vastly different set of instincts. Looking at the Zarude and Celebi parallel reveals the two sides of nature itself, and understanding that contrast is the final piece of the puzzle. The shrines of Ilex Forest and Eterna Forest whisper of a civilization that understood the deep connection between Pokémon and place. They built monuments not to conquer nature, but to coexist with its guardian. But what exactly is a forest guardian? And how does that role change depending on the nature of the forest itself? For decades, our understanding of that archetype was embodied entirely by Celebi, a single gentle spirit, the voice of the forest, a being of pure psychic and grass energy that healed the land simply by passing through it. Its protection was a passive force, a caretaker, a gardener watching over a sacred grove, manipulating time itself to undo any tragedy that befell the woodland. It required peace to even appear. Then Generation 8 arrived, and with it, a different kind of guardian, a myth from the deepest jungles of Galar, a Pokémon called Zarude, and where Celebi spoke of symbiosis, Zarude roared of survival. This was no longer the voice of the forest. This was the jungle's wrath. Comparing Celebi's guardianship with the more aggressive protection of Zarude reveals a fascinating evolution in how this franchise views nature itself. Celebi is the heart of the forest. Its life force is tied to every leaf and root. When it is hurt, the forest withers. Its power is entirely restorative. Its primary weapon is the flow of time itself. Zarude, on the other hand, is the body of the jungle. Its Pokédex entries tell us it lives in packs, and that other Pokémon in its territory genuinely fear it. It waits patiently for prey. It creates vines that can cut through steel. Its existence is a testament to the survival of the fittest. It doesn't negotiate with intruders, it removes them. How does the voice of the forest differ from the jungle's wrath? Consider their origins. Celebi only reveals itself in times of perfect harmony. Its entire mythology is built on symbiosis between humanity and the wild. Zarude exists in the chaos of the dense jungle. It does not require peace to exist. It enforces its own version of order through sheer physical presence. One is a diplomat from a bygone age of unity. The other is a general commanding a battlefield of thorns and roots. This evolution of the Forest Guardian archetype in later generations does not stop at a simple binary switch from passive to aggressive. Look closely at Generation 6. We received Trevenant, a Pokémon that does not just protect the forest with gentle guidance. Trevenant punishes. It traps those who harm the woods within its own wooden body. It is the vengeful spirit of a child lost in the wild, transformed into a terrifying warden. The forest no longer simply speaks, it whispers a warning. And then we have the Tapas of Alola. Tapu Bulu, specifically, is a grass and fairy type that causes vegetation to grow abundantly, but it punishes anyone who touches its belongings with an absolute fury. It is a guardian with a temper, a severe sense of property and balance. Nature is not just the gentle breeze through Ilex forest. It is the storm that snaps the oldest trees. What this tells us is that the franchise has matured its understanding of what a protector must be. In the early days, a guardian was a benevolent spirit, a rare mythical gift to the world. As the world of Pokémon became more complex, so did its guardians. The ideal of a pure pacifistic protector now sits alongside a harsh territorial enforcer. This brings us to a deeper question, one that forms the philosophical core of guardianship itself. You have the gentle time traveler who heals with a touch, and the raging primate who defends with its life. Which path holds the true secret to lasting safety? Is it the passive voice that creates an eternal sanctuary, or the active wrath that drives away the corruption? This tension, this fundamental contrast between the soft glow of renewal and the sharp edge of survival, is the subject of our next conversation. In Chapter 26, we will explore the philosophy of peace, and wonder aloud whether the forest's quiet voice or its protecting wrath holds the final answer. Where Zarude throws itself physically against the threats to its jungle, clawing and roaring in a direct war against deforestation, Celebi operates on an entirely different wavelength. It does not fight for peace, it simply reflects it. Where the jungle's wrath is loud, the voice of the forest is defined by its silence. Celebi is less a warrior and more a tuning fork, vibrating in a perfect harmonic only when the world around it has stopped screaming. Its protection is not a battle, it is a withdrawal, an absence. If Zarude is the immune system of the jungle, attacking every pathogen the moment it appears, Celebi is the barometer, a delicate instrument of crystal and quartz that only resonates when the air is perfectly still and the pressure is exactly right. Why does this creature only appear during times of absolute tranquility? The answer lies in the physics of its unique ability. Celebi travels through time. Time is not a static river, it is a turbulent ocean of causality, prone to storms of conflict and tsunamis of disaster. When the world is at war, when there is chaos in the human heart or in the natural order, the timeline becomes a maelstrom. Celebi, as a being that can exist in two distinct moments simultaneously, cannot navigate those rough waters safely. A violent timeline is like a frozen lake cracking under pressure. One wrong step, one appearance at the wrong moment, and the entire structure could shatter. Its biology demands stillness. As a psychic type, it feels the psychic weight of every scream, every falling tree, every clash of ideologies in the world below. It is an empath on a planetary scale, and to appear in a world that is crying would be an agony too great to bear. The tranquility it requires is not just a preference, it is a biological necessity. You cannot heal a wound while the blade is still twisting. The Ilex shrine, that wooden structure at the edge of the forest, is not a key to summoning Celebi in the way a bell calls a servant. It is a harp, it is a prayer, it is a signal from humanity that they have laid down their tools, that they are ready for peace. When the air is filled with the sound of war, the harbour sits empty. No ship can dock. Celebi slips deeper into the green stream of time, waiting for the storm to pass, for the forest to grow quiet again, for the world to remember how to breathe. This brings us to the core realization that transforms Celebi from a simple mythical Pokémon into a philosophical concept. Celebi is a barometer for the world's moral and environmental health. Its presence or absence is a reading on the gauge of the planet's soul. When human civilization is in balance, when we are good stewards of the trees and the rivers, the gauge needle swings toward green, the forest breathes easier. Celebi feels this shift in the pressure of the time stream. It peers through the veil of the present moment, sees a world that has earned a moment of grace and decides to reveal itself. A healthy forest means a healthy Celebi. Its life force is directly bound to the flora around it. When the Eternity Forest in the anime was ripped apart by the blades of industrialization, it was not just a tragedy for the trees. It was a physical wound to Celebi itself. As the trees fell, so did its strength. The two are inseparable, but the reverse is also true. When Celebi finally does appear, plant life does not just grow, it explodes. It revitalizes entire landscapes in moments. It can build ancient forests from a single seed. This is the philosophy of peace made manifest. Peace is not just the absence of war, it is the active flourishing of life. Every leaf that unfurls in the presence of Celebi is a piece of evidence that the world is in a state of moral and environmental recovery. The forest is not just growing, it is forgiving. What happens when the barometer never rises? What happens when Celebi refuses to appear? This is the darkest question in its lore, and the answer reveals the true gravity of its role. The refusal of Celebi to step into a timeline is a diagnosis of a terminal illness for that reality. If Celebi refuses to appear, it means the timeline is too broken to enter. It is not just a skipping of a moment, it is the loss of the reset button entirely. The timeline is left to its own devices, left to rot without a healer. In the Pokémon Mystery Dungeon universe, where the future is paralyzed by a crushing darkness, Celebi is the sole agent of hope. It is the one who must send Grovyle and the hero back through time to fix the world. If Celebi had refused, if it had deemed that timeline too corrupt, too chaotic to heal, the world would have remained frozen. A single terrible moment stretched into an eternity. This is the fate of a timeline that fails to achieve peace. It does not just lose its guardian, it loses its future. It loses the opportunity for redemption entirely. The forests grow silent, not with the peace of rest, but with the silence of the grave. The timeline collapses into a straight line of perpetual winter, without the gentle curve of spring to look forward to. Celebi refuses to appear because it is the healer, and the healer cannot walk into a plague without bringing the contagion back to the sanctuary. Its refusal is a protective instinct for the forest itself. The timeline must be healthy enough to host it. If the world is a patient bleeding out on the table, Celebi cannot operate until the bleeding stops. This makes Celebi incredibly rare. You cannot hunt it. You cannot trap it. You cannot force the world to be healthy by sheer force of will. You must live your way into that state of grace. It is a reward for collective enlightenment. Think about what it means to live in a world where peace is the exception rather than the rule. How often does Celebi actually appear in the games and the anime? Very rarely. That scarcity is a commentary on our own reality. The fact that we only see Celebi once every few generations, chronologically speaking, suggests that the Pokémon timeline is constantly teetering on the edge of unworthiness. Every time it is a blessing. It is a confirmation that, for just a moment, the world got it right. This entire way of thinking, this delicate philosophy of presence and absence, of healing and refusal, is not just a happy accident of the writing room. It was breathed into existence by a specific person with a specific vision. It was sketched into being with an intention that goes deeper than simply creating a cute mythical Pokémon to sell tickets. To understand why this creature feels so fragile, so wise, so definitively tied to the concept of perfection through peace, we must look at the artist who held the pencil. The design choices that made Celebi look like a crystalline fairy of the woods. The choice to give it wings that look like they could be made of wind or glass. The soft curve of its eyes. All of this was deliberate. The Art of Hironobu Yoshida is the final piece of the puzzle. The secret origin of how a philosophy became a Pokémon, and why it looks exactly the way it does to reflect the stillness it so desperately craves. And yet, for all that philosophy of peace, the question remains: how does a creature so ethereal come to exist in a world of pixels and code? The answer lies not in the forest, but in the hands of one artist at Game Freak, Hironobu Yoshida. Yoshida was tasked with designing Celebi, at a time when the Pokémon franchise was still in its infancy, and the Game Boy Color was the canvas. He wanted Celebi to be fairy-like, a gentle counterpart to the first mythical Mew, but creating a fairy-like charm on a screen that could only display a few shades of green and purple was a challenge that forced elegance from limitation. In the original sprite, Celebi's design is deceptively simple. A small round body, large eyes, and two wing-like appendages that resemble leaves. But look closer, and you'll see the constraints of the Game Boy Color's 4-color palette. Yoshida had to rely on shape and silhouette to convey softness. The wings couldn't be detailed, so he made them translucent by using a lighter shade of the background color. The head's two antennae, like tiny frats, suggest a connection to the forest without needing a single pixel of leaf texture. Every line had to work double duty. The same outline that makes Celebi cute also makes it instantly readable against the dark backdrop of Ilex Forest. That sprite, despite its simplicity, radiates a glow. It's not a literal glow. There was no bloomer effect in Generation 2, but the combination of its open, curved posture, the slight tilt of its head, and the way its wings seem to flutter by being drawn at an angle, all create an impression of light. When the games moved to the Nintendo DS with HeartGold and SoulSilver, that glow had to be preserved. The transition from 2D sprites to 3D models was a delicate operation. Yoshida's original intent for a fairy-like charm could easily have been lost in the uncanny valley of early polygonal Pokémon. Instead, the artist chose to retain the sprite's iconic proportions. The oversized head, the gentle curve of the neck, the way the wings are always slightly raised, as if ready to take flight. They added a subtle particle effect around Celebi, a soft green aura that mimics the ethereal quality of the original sprite's feel, rather than its literal pixels. The color palette was updated, but the core of the design stayed true. Celebi is not a creature of sharp edges or aggressive postures. It is a being that exists in stillness, even as it travels through time. And this brings us back to the shrine. The Ilex shrine, though added as a simple background detail, became the focal point of a rumor that Game Freak never intended. Yet that rumor, that you could summon Celebi by bringing rainbow and silver wings to the shrine, took on a life of its own. In HeartGold and SoulSilver, Game Freak finally honored that player-driven legend by making it real. But why does the shrine work? Because it mirrors the very design philosophy of Yoshida, a simple, almost primitive structure built from wood and faith that radiates peace. The shrine is not grand nor threatening, it is humble, and that is exactly where a fairy-like guardian would choose to appear. The eternal cycle of the Ilex shrine is not just about a Pokémon. It is about how a community's imagination can shape the lore, and how a single artist's vision, constrained by a few pixels, can create something that glows across generations. The previous chapter explored how Hironobu Yoshida shaped the idea of Celebi from a handful of Game Boy Color pixels. Those pixels created an icon, but an icon needs a home. In the game data, the shrine was just a few horizontal lines of color representing a roof and a staircase, a humble collection of tiles, a background detail with no original narrative purpose. But players looked at those tiles and saw something sacred. They projected a focal point onto the blank space of the code. They saw a door. The world itself demanded meaning, and so the lore of the Ilex shrine was born, not from a developer's decree, but from a collective need to ground the mythical in the physical, a need to give the forest guardian a place to rest. The shrine sits at the edge of Ilex Forest, a short walk from the gate that leads out of Azalea Town. It is deliberately modest. You will not find gold leaf or carved statues here. You will not find the grandiosity of the bell tower or the cold stone of the ruins of Alf. Just wood. Damp, aged, unassuming wood, cut from the very trees it honors. This is the first and most important lesson the shrine teaches. It remains a wooden, humble structure, despite the immense power of the being connected to it, because it is not a monument to strength. It is a monument to presence. Stone lasts forever and it intimidates. Wood breathes. It ages, it rots, it must be replaced. This cycle of growth and decay is the very essence of Celebi itself. The shrine is built to fade, just as the leaves turn and fall, so that it can be rebuilt again in the spring. And this act of rebuilding is the true secret of the place. The shrine is not maintained by a single ancient priest or a mechanical device. It is maintained by the hands of the community. Every season, the people of Azalea Town take it upon themselves to replace a rotted plank, to clear the moss from the stairs, to ensure the small roof does not leak. It is done in silence. This labor is the truest form of human and Pokémon harmony in Johto. The forest gives wood and shade. The humans give care and attention. It is a mutual agreement. In return, the guardian of the forest simply continues to exist. It allows the natural world to flourish around the village. It is a silent contract, signed not with ink, but with calloused hands and the smell of cedar. The terms of this contract are sealed through the tradition of leaving offerings. You will not find chests of jewels or rare candies on the steps. You will find berries. You will find herbs, small wooden charms carved from fallen branches. The tradition dictates that these offerings are left at the specific change of the seasons. The offering is a token of labor, a seed, a fruit, a handful of clean soil wrapped in a leaf. In return, the community asks for a single thing, a bountiful harvest. It is not a demand, it is a request, a prayer whispered into the bark of an ancient tree. The grass typing of Celebi makes this connection deeply literal. It is a conduit for the earth's vitality. When the shrine is honored, the rain comes on time, the soil is soft, the crops grow tall and the forest glows. When the shrine is neglected, the woods grow cold. This is not punishment. It is the silence of a bond left unrepaired. This single cycle is beautiful in its isolation. The quiet life of Azalea Town, the wooden grains of the shrine, the yearly ritual of the offering. It represents an eternal return, a peaceful loop. But a time traveler is rarely bound to one place forever. A creature that can exist in two eras simultaneously is not just a guardian of one forest. It is a thread that moves back and forth through the entire fabric of reality. This shrine is a single stitch in that fabric, a single point of light in the great tapestry of Pokémon history. What happens when the threads of this small, perfect cycle are pulled into the warp and weft of an older, deeper story? What survives when the tapestry is woven by forces older than the wood of the shrine itself? That mystery waits in the quiet spaces ahead. Good night and sleep well. The Ilex shrine stands as a testament to a relationship built on trust and silence. But a shrine is not just a monument. It is a doorway, a point of intersection between worlds. In our last chapter, we considered why that humble structure remains so simple, why its weathered wood and unadorned stones seem to reject the trappings of grandeur that might otherwise surround a deity. It is humble because Celebi does not demand glory, it asks only for peace. But what stands on the other side of that door? What is the greater context that this gentle guardian operates within? To understand Celebi's true place in the world, you have to zoom out, far out, past the trees of the Ilex forest, past the borders of Johto, past the continents themselves, and into the very fabric of the cosmos. The Pokémon world is held together by a handful of incredibly powerful, incredibly abstract entities. Arceus, the alpha Pokémon, created existence. Dialga governs the flow of time, ensuring that past, present and future do not collapse into a single chaotic moment. Palkia governs space. Giratina governs antimatter and the realm of distortion. These are the pillars of reality. Where does a small psychic grass-type guardian of a single forest fit into this pantheon of cosmic architects? The answer is that Celebi is the bridge. It is the living thread that connects the cold abstraction of time to the warm beating heart of the world. Dialga sits at the center of the timeline, a massive phlegmatic dragon watching the rivers of causality flow from a distant throne. Dialga controls the river, but Celebi swims in it. More accurately, Celebi is the leaf that floats on the current, drifting from one bank to another. sometimes stepping out onto the shore of a specific moment to check on the health of a tree or to guide a lost soul. This is the great tapestry. Arceus wove the loom. Dialga provides the dimension of time through which the weaving occurs, and Celebi is the very needle that carries the thread, passing through the cosmic warp and weft, stitching the divine plan directly into the soil of the earth. It takes the abstract power of time and makes it tangible. It makes it green. It makes it grow. When Celebi appears, plants do not just spring up. Life itself seems to remember its purpose. This is the profound mystery of its power. Celebi does not just travel through time. It is a conduit for the life force of the planet. When it appears in a time of peace, it seems to say, yes, this moment is worth continuing. This timeline deserves to flourish. This brings us to the deepest of the enduring mysteries surrounding this creature. Dialga is always at the center of time. It cannot leave. It is the dimension. But Celebi comes and goes. It arrives in the Ilex forest, blesses the shrine, interacts with the trainer, and then vanishes. Where does Celebi go when it is not here? It is not a question of location in the physical sense. The forest is not just a place to Celebi. It is an anchor, a docking point, but the ocean of time is vast. When Celebi dives into the current, it is visiting other points in the planet's history. But what about the moments between visits? Is there a quiet space, a white room between seconds where the Guardian rests? Or does Celebi exist everywhere at once? A quantum creature that is simply collapsed into visibility only when the conditions of absolute peace are met. The anime gave us a glimpse of a terrifying consequence of this existence. In the story of the Eternity Forest, Celebi was critically wounded. Its life force was fading because its forest was being destroyed. It did not just flee, it prayed. It sent a desperate signal across the fabric of reality directly to Arceus, and Arceus answered. The response was not a gentle breeze. It was a blast of light that turned an entire civilization to stone, freezing the forest in a single, eternal moment so that Celebi could survive. This event recontextualizes Celebi's role entirely. It is not merely a servant of Dialga or a pet of Arceus. It is a vital organ of the planet itself. If the forest is the lungs of the world, Celebi is its heartbeat, and the cosmic entities that govern existence need that heartbeat. The cold mechanical control of Dialga's time is balanced by the vibrant, organic flow of Celebi's time. Dialga is the absolute law. Celebi is the living application of that law in the natural world. It is the intermediary, the voice that speaks for the trees to the gods, and the whisper that brings the will of the gods down to the earth. It translates the cosmic order into the cycle of seasons. It translates the power of creation into the sprouting of a single seed. This is its primary impact on the overall Pokémon mythology. It is the proof that the universe is not just a machine of laws and dimensions, but that it has a heart, a guardian that tends the garden. So when Celebi disappears from our sight, it is not entering a void. It is most likely fulfilling other duties in other eras, or perhaps it has simply drifted to a specific niche within the fabric of time where the peace required for its manifestation does not yet exist. The mystery remains unsolved by the Pokédex, which only hints at its comings and goings. Celebi exists in a superposition. It is always here, sleeping in the roots, and always gone, dancing in the light of a distant star. We have traced the thread through the tapestry, from the humble shrine to the thrones of the creators. We have seen how this single, gentle creature bridges the gap between the infinite and the finite. But every tapestry has a border. Every story has a final scene. What happens when the needle stops weaving? When the last grove stands solitary against the dusk of an era? The answers to that lie in the final, quiet reflection of our journey together, in the chapter we call The Final Sunset in the Grove. From the great tapestry of Pokémon mythology, we now turn our gaze to the one thread that holds the entire picture together. That thread is the peace Celebi brings to the Johto region. And to understand that peace, we must sit for a moment in the stillness of the Ilex Grove, at the hour when the sun dips below the ancient trees and the world holds its breath. You see, for all the cosmic power that Celebi possesses, the ability to slip between centuries, to heal the wounds of time itself, the time travel Pokémon has never claimed dominion. It does not rule the forest. It is the forest. Every root that drinks from the soil, every leaf that turns its face to the light, every rustle of grass beneath a passing Pidgey. These are the voices that Celebi listens to, and it is in that listening that the Johto region finds its deepest calm. The Ilex forest has stood for generations as a sanctuary, a place where the boundary between human and Pokémon dissolves into something older. The shrine at its edge, that humble wooden structure weathered by rain and wind, was never meant to be a temple of power. It is a monument to gratitude, a reminder that what grows in silence is often more precious than what is built in noise. And Celebi, the guardian, asks for nothing in return but that we remember to pause, to let the forest breathe. This is the legacy of the time travel Pokémon as a symbol of hope and renewal, not a legacy of conquest or of bending the world to a single will. Celebi's hope is quiet. It is the hope that a sapling will become a tree, that a seed carried by the wind will find fertile ground, that the cycle of seasons, of birth and decay and rebirth, will continue unbroken. When Celebi travels through time, it is not to rewrite history or to undo mistakes. It is to witness the same promise repeated across the ages, that life finds a way, that green shoots push through ash, that even a forest scarred by fire will one day rise again. And so we arrive at the final sunset in the grove. Not the end of a story, but the closing of a chapter that has always been about beginnings. Celebi remains the ultimate guardian of the natural world, precisely because it does not fight against the flow of time. It rides the current, patient and enduring, knowing that every sunset is followed by a dawn. The forest will age, the trees will fall, the shrine may one day crumble into dust, but as long as one seed remains, as long as one creature remembers the sound of wind through the leaves, Celebi will return, and the peace of Johto will be reborn. So let the final image settle gently in your mind. That warm amber light filtering through the canopy, the soft flutter of fairy wings, the whisper of a voice that speaks not in words, but in the rustle of 1,000 leaves. Celebi does not need to be worshipped. It only asks that we leave room for wonder, for growth, for the quiet hope that the world can be healed. And in that hope, the grove sleeps peacefully, ready for the next dawn. What did you think of this journey? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this changed your perspective or taught you something new, consider subscribing for more mind-expanding content. And if you know someone who would find this as fascinating as you did, share it with them. These are the kind of conversations that matter,